start with giving you a little bit of my background so you know what my perspective is. I have 30 plus years of experience as a healthcare administrator in very large organizations at a major medical center. Basically, before we moved up here, my husband and I lived in Houston, Texas, so I worked at the Texas Medical Center. So I spent my entire career in the nonprofit, service-oriented environment, kind of like county government, but not county government. I worked in clinical, educational, and research environments. By clinical, I mean hospitals. I worked at Methodist Hospital and MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston. Perhaps some of you have heard of MD Anderson Cancer Center. Educational, the medical schools were UT Medical School, Baylor College of Medicine, and I ended my career by helping start the new medical school at Washington State University. I was their administrative finance officer and basically helped write all the documents that got us our original accreditation. Regarding research, all of the institutions that I worked at, I was involved in research as a research administrator in both clinical and also translational and basic science research. In all of my positions, a professional code of ethics and professional standards were required. I was responsible for managing large numbers of staff, complex departments and centers, and complex budgets and financial enterprises. So I think you can understand why I undertook this project. I kind of have research in my blood, and whenever I have a new task that I'm given, I always try to do my best to put energy into finding out what others might be doing and bounce those ideas off what I'm doing. This presentation, though, is not my opinion. You will see as I go through it. There's a lot of facts and data in here. There are stories and conversations. I actually am going to share with you the experience of others. Sources of information that I used. Used the National Association of County website. I talked to their officials, and I used rather extensively what's called the County Explorer database. And I'm going to give you a little demo of that because this is something that any of you can access. And it's really kind of fascinating to see the information that's out there available to all of us. I and my teammates on the research subcommittee did extensive literature searches. We've got lots of materials that we can share with our colleagues on the subcommittee. That's not the purpose of this discussion, but we do have lots of information that we can share in kind of a document form or white papers going forward. Primarily, you're going to see I had a lot of interviews and conversations with people across the country, and that's what I'm going to be sharing with you. My general strategy was as follows. I used the County Explorer database. Then I selected the appointed county administrator category. Again, I'm a professional administrator, so that's kind of my focus. That is an area that that is a form that we do not currently have, and that therefore none of the officials who came to talk to us could really give us much information on that because we haven't experienced it. So I talked to people. I wanted to talk to people who did have that experience. So I used this database and selected that category. Then I drilled down by county. And then I reached out to county managers in counties with similar characteristics to Kootenai County. So I'm going to demo this for you, and I hope that I have no difficulty getting this up. If not, I've got a trusty crew over there. So this is the database. If you see that ce.naco.org, any of you can Google that. You can be doing it right now. Okay, I get into the category called maps. You see the map of the United States? See all those little boxes, those shapes?
It's not up on the screen.
Oh, it's only on my screen. Well, I'm so sorry. And my trusty helpers have come to bail me out.
We're seeing it remotely, though.
You are? How interesting.
It was there, but now it's gone.
There.
There it is.
Okay. So basically, move it there, and then I hit. No, it's not showing up there. Huh.
I think you will have to mirror your screen, Kristin, in order to get it to show up both on the presentation screen and on Zoom.
But we are seeing it on Zoom.
Well, I think we can figure this out because I think you'll all be interested. But if not, at least you've got the information. Okay. All right. So this is County Explorer. And look what fun you can have with County Explorer. Let's go over, and of course, when I have a mouse at home, I can work this a lot better. Kootenai County. Okay, we care about Kootenai County. What's it going to say about Kootenai County? Pops up with information about our county. The county seat, the year we were organized, total square miles, population in 2018. This information's a little dated. Persons per square mile. Look at the type of government we have. We have a county government. We follow Dillon's rule. We have a board of commissioners, and there are 3 of them. And then you can see all the other information. I can do that with any county. So let's just, anybody has a, well, okay, we just came up with Crook County, Wyoming. I didn't mean to hit that one, but you see the same type of information. So you can go by county. You can search for a county. But let me go into what I concentrated on, which is county governance. Now, if I would have clicked county finances, a little box would come up and I would hover over a county and it's going to tell you what the expenditures are, what the budget is. There's just a wealth of information out there. But let's look at county government. Then I went to county administrators. Then I went to appointed county administrators. And here's our map. Now, what's interesting, I think, is that there are 3,069 counties in the United States. And all those dark blue ones are the ones that have an administrator. That happens to be 40% of all of the counties that are in the United States. But there's another way to look at it. Look at that bottom bar. If you can't see it, let me read it for you. So on the far left-hand side, no administrator or no elected executive. 1,132. An elected executive or no administrator, an administrator appointed by an elected executive, an administrator and elected executive. So if you want to look at what counties across the United States have what you call an executive branch, either an administrator or a hired executive, that actually comes to 63% of the counties in the country. I only throw that out because I think a number has been thrown around that there are fewer counties in the U.S. that have an executive component than those that do not. And I want to be clear that actually the executive and or administrator form of government is really in the majority when you look at counties around the country. And now I'm trying to get out of this, Nancy, and you said there'd be the X there, but I think it's covered. Oh, no, I see it. All right. So, that said, and I really hope on some snowy night when there's nothing good on Amazon or Netflix, you'll all go out to ce.naco.org because there's really a lot of fun information out there. That you can look at, and if you've got family around the country, you can kind of get some information about their county, probably more information than they even have themselves. So, how did I select the counties that I'm going to talk to you about? I looked at population size, so I want it to be relatively similar to what we've got in Kootenai County. I wanted to look at the urban-rural mix. It would not have done us any good to look at a county that was primarily urban or primarily rural. We needed something where it was like the Coeur d'Alene, Post Falls, Hayden kind of component with a lot of rural area and ag area mixed in. I wanted counties that were able to offer their residents recreational activities and that had some component of tourism, because again, a lot of our businesses here kind of live and die based on tourism. I wanted to look at regional significance. I learned a new word. I'd never heard of this term, micropolitan statistical area. We've heard of metropolitan, but micropolitan means a smaller city or smaller urban area within a county or series of counties that has a significance to the region. So now think about Idaho. You've got Coeur d'Alene and you've got all those northern counties. You've got Lewiston, and there's a lot of activity there. You've got Boise and Ada counties, and you've got some that I'm not as familiar with that are in the eastern side of the state. So all of the counties that I looked at, I wanted to be sure had some regional significance like ours does. And I also looked at politically conservative states. We are a politically conservative state. Kootenai County is a politically conservative county. So there was no point in looking at counties that wouldn't mirror us in terms of our political focus, you might say. So here are the counties I selected. I looked at lots of them, but in terms of what I'm presenting to you, I'm presenting Cass County, North Dakota, 3 counties in South Dakota, 3 counties in North Carolina, and finally Summit County, Utah. My conversations with the county managers in each of these counties range from 35 minutes at the least to an hour and 15 minutes. These people were extremely generous with their time. How did I approach it? I first sent an email and I introduced myself. I explained that I was part of a study commission and that our government, our state statute allowed us to look at alternate forms, optional forms of government, and that a group of us were tasked with doing that. And I asked if they would have some time to talk with me. I told them that before we talked, I would have looked at their websites and gleaned every bit of information I could so that I wouldn't waste their time, and we could start from a basis of my understanding what their general form of government was. What was interesting to me, and you'll see this as we go forward, is the variations in form of government within states. I was surprised about that, and I'll be sharing that with you. So let's start with Cass County, North Dakota. Kind of looks like downtown Coeur d'Alene. Cass County, North Dakota has had a 5-person board of, BOC stands for Board of Commissioners, of course, a 5-person BOC for decades. I asked the county manager to talk to me a little bit about that. He says that the people feel they have better representation with 5. They can form subcommittees to brainstorm, and this is going to be a pretty recurrent theme. Right now, as you all know, with 3, you can't get 2 together without it being a conflict. You've got to have kind of an open meeting environment in order to do that. When you've got more than 3, they can and do form subcommittees. That information has to be taken back to the full commission for a vote, but they can form subcommittees to brainstorm. They can focus on policy issues, and they delegate day-to-day operations. And I wish that wasn't there because it's impacting me now too. In 2015, they made a change in Cass County, and they decided to create a county administrator position. It was only a county coordinator before. I'm going to move here just a second to my printed slides because I don't want to miss something because I can't see it on the screen, so bear with me. As I said, it was only a county coordinator before. And also until 2018, the other elected officials were the sheriff, the state's attorney, the treasurer, the auditor, and the recorder. So that was prior to 2018. They are what's called a home rule state, and so they did not have to go through the process that we have to do in Kootenai, where we have to form the study commission, and then it goes back to the commissioners, and they put it on the ballot. They have a home rule state, has much more flexibility. So they were able to make these changes without taking it to the public. What did they do? They not only create or made the county administrator position permanent, but they actually created something called a finance director position. And it was interesting. Why did they do that? Because in 2018, the auditor and the treasurer and the recorder were retiring. And, you know, it's easy when someone's retiring to say, you know, now that we're not going to be in the job anymore, let us tell you what we think would be better regarding our jobs. And so they basically told the Board of County Commissioners that their positions required professional skill that they didn't feel that they had, and they thought in the future it needed to be managed differently. So they determined that they would consolidate the roles. They created a finance director position and rolled the auditor, treasurer, and recorder into that, and that became a position that was hired rather than elected. Hughes County, South Dakota. Another, I wanted to add, because the county seat of Cass County is Fargo. You've probably all heard of Fargo, North Dakota. Fargo is a fairly large city, but around it is a very, very rural area. Okay, now we have Hughes County, South Dakota. And Hughes County is, I gotta make sure I've got that right. The county seat for Hughes County is Pierre. They call it Pierre. We would call it, if we looked at it, Pierre, because it's spelled P-I-E-R-R-E. But just like around here, we call it Cheney rather than Cheney. You know, and Coeur d'Alene is not Coeur d'Alene. You know, in your own area, you tend to come up with your name for it. And they call it Pierre. So if you're going to visit Pierre, that's what you want to call it. It, too, is a combination rural and urban area, but it's a much smaller county in population. I picked it because it has such regional significance, because it's also the capital of the state of South Dakota. Okay, in Hughes County, their form of government changed in 2006 as a result of a county initiative. They changed to a 5-person board of commissioners. They all have full-time jobs or are retired. I asked why they picked a 5-person board of commissioners. They feel it increases the talent pool, because they don't have to just find people who want to be a commissioner as a full-time job. They have people who have other interests and involvements in the community, but still have some time. They actively wanted to be able to create subcommittees of 2 members that would present to the full commission, and they felt that it increased representation. They created at that time a permanent county manager position. It was a coordinator before. The other electeds were sheriff, state's attorney, treasurer, auditor, recorder, and coroner. And they did what Cass County did. They actually created an elected finance officer position. So they took the auditor, treasurer, and recorder, they put that together in something called the finance officer, with a chief deputy in charge of each separate department. So that was the way they solved the problem. Minnehaha County, South Dakota. The county seat is Sioux Falls. Minnehaha is about the size that we are, and Sioux Falls is a fairly large city. It's a larger city than the combined Coeur d'Alene, Post Falls, Hayden. But it's a fairly large county, and it has a large rural area. I spoke with Carol Muller there, who happens to be the county administrator. You're going to note there are different titles: county coordinator, county administrator, county manager. The National Association of Counties says there's something like 114, 115 different titles. Sometimes they call them the chief executive officer. So when I use the term county manager, I kind of use that as a catch-all. Minnehaha County, South Dakota. They've always had a 5-member board of commissioners, at least according to the individual I talked to, Carol, and she's lived in the county for 30 years, was kind of born and raised in the county. The board of commissioners work about 10 to 30 hours a week. It's as she says, and these are their words. I'm pulling out statements that they made to me, so I'm using their words. She said it's a citizen commission rather than folks who need a job. They get a very small salary, no benefits. They do get a cell phone. One of them is retired, and 4 are currently employed. The other electeds are the sheriff, state's attorney, treasurer, auditor, elections clerk, register of deeds. I'm going to catch up here too in case I get to the point where I can't read this anymore. South Dakota is rather interesting too, because in you'll see kind of a pattern in the counties that I'm presenting. The assessor and the director of equalization, they do this differently than we do. Again, this is just the way they do it, not saying it's right, wrong, or indifferent. The assessor and director of equalization are hired, but they have levels of protection from the state. They must, the assessors and all of the assessor's assistants must be certified by the South Dakota Department of Revenue. So they all have a certification for the role that they play. The county administrator serves as the supervisor of the departments that are not managed by the electeds. That's another theme that kind of comes through. It's all those departments that the Board of Commissioners are responsible for. Like here would be the airport and you know, that whole list of, I can't remember if it's 17 or 20 or however many departments that the Board of Commissioners are responsible for. Those are managed by the, and supervised by the county administrator. All the elected officials, you know, the sheriff, the state's attorney, the treasurer, et cetera, they're responsible for their own staff. And so the county manager does not interfere in that operation at all. Pennington County, South Dakota. Rapid City is the county seat. And you will recognize, I would think, this picture. This happens to be in Pennington County. So they get a lot of tourists. Their population overall is a little smaller than Kootenai County. Their square footage or their square miles is a little bit bigger, but they still keeps a lot of the characteristics of a combination of rural, urban, regional significance, conservative county. So what about Pennington then? Pennington has a 5-member board of commission. They offer them a minimal salary. You're going to see this is pretty much a theme throughout. They all have other jobs or they're retired. Their subcommittees are not only allowed, but they're regulated. So it's actually encouraged for the commissioners who have a particular interest or area of expertise to work together on something, and then they take it back to the full board for approval. So they basically utilize their talent pool pretty effectively, it seems. The other electeds are sheriff, state's attorney, auditor, register of deeds, and treasurer. You can see they don't have that finance director. Appointed or hired is, just like the other counties, the Board of Equalization and the assessor. As I said before, it's regulated, but not only is it regulated, but this particular county administrator told me that there are protections under state statute from partisan firing. So it's not as if the assessor can be fired willy-nilly just because of the politics of the situation. So the Board of Commissioners cannot just fire this person without significant cause. So again, their state puts protections in for some of these. The commission manager handles the administrative work, serves as a liaison with the electeds and with the department heads. In the case of Pennington County, their county manager, or in this case they call it commission manager, does not have the responsibility for supervising all of those departments. Let's move to another state. Pitt County, North Carolina. I actually lived there once upon a time, like decades ago, actually before those 30 years that I mentioned, so really dating myself. This is the Tar River, and I lived near the Tar River, and I'm here to tell you, it didn't look like that back then. It was very, very natural. I think they've had issues with flooding, and so this was the result. But this is Pitt County, North Carolina. It has a regional medical center. I know some things about it because that's why I was there in the very beginning. Their medical center was very small at that point. But again, it's very much like Kootenai County in the sense of being a regional draw for people in not only the rest of the county, but in the smaller counties around the area, the smaller, more rural counties. Okay, Pitt County. Now, North Carolina is interesting because you've got lots of variety. So they have a 9-member board of commissioners. They pay these commissioners $9,000 annually, and they get health insurance. I said, why 9? Because this is the first one I'd heard with 9. They said, well, they've always had 9. He didn't know. He'd been there, I think his name was Scott Elliott. He'd been there, yes, Scott Elliott told me he'd been there for years, and it's always been that way. So he didn't know that, he couldn't really speak to the history. But it's interesting how they divide them up. And again, some of these things, we couldn't even consider doing any of these things. So I just am showing you this in terms of interest, in terms of what kind of variety there is in county government around the country. They have six districts, so they have 1 commissioner per district. And then they hire 3 other commissioners, and they have 2 districts. So you've got commissioner 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then you've got 7 having 1 and 2, district 1 and 2, and 8, 3 and 4. You kind of get the picture. So talk about representation. These folks get a lot of representation, a lot of people to vote for. Their other electeds are the sheriff and the register of deeds. The county manager's office includes the clerk to the board of commissioners and the assessor. I asked about checks and balances because that's an issue that has come up in our group often, and because there are fewer electeds, and the comment was the management staff are professionals. They're guided by professional organizations both within North Carolina and external to North Carolina, and they felt that it really was not an issue. I do want to point out North Carolina has a different judicial structure, so it's not at all comparable to ours. For their district court, the county provides and maintains the building and the facility, but the state budget pays for staff and the general infrastructure. And the county attorney, the county attorney reports to the board of commissioners because he's advising the board of commissioners. But the state's attorney is actually paid by the state, and while might be hired at the local level, elected at the local level through an election, the funding all comes from the state. So that's somewhat like ours in terms of the funding, but it's a very different system. So we have to appreciate the fact that in counties like Kootenai or any counties in Idaho, we have a significant expense to the citizens because we do pay for that. That's neither here nor there. I'm just saying that in North Carolina, they do not have the expense of that. So they can use their funds a little bit differently. Iredell County. Iredell County is in the middle of the state. Their county seat is Statesville. Never heard of it before. I'm sure you haven't either. Population was 187,000 in 2021. That's kind of like us. They have a very, the southern end is urban, the northern end is, she said it's I spoke with Beth Moe, she said it's the #1 dairy producer in North Carolina, very strong agriculture. They have lakes in the area, so they have lots of recreational activities. It has regional significance. So what do they have? They have a 5-member board of commissioners. with a small monthly, the board gets a small monthly stipend, no benefits. I asked about that. I asked about how they would attract people or why the citizens might have determined that they wanted this form. And Beth Mull told me that it's a very conservative county. The citizens feel that even health benefits are unnecessary for the service role that the Board of Commissioners play. They want their Board of Commissioners to concentrate on policy issues. And each member oversees a task force. So there's economic development, public safety and justice, education, general government, public health and well-being, and the departments that the commissioners would be responsible for all fall underneath these categories. The other electeds are the sheriff and register of deeds. The county, for the county manager, finance and HR report to the management team. She feels that they have a quality, competent Board of Commissioners, and it's the Board of Commissioners and the other electeds who take politics into account if needed. Management staff must be nonpartisan, and you'll hear more about that later. They have strategic planning goals. They have a very active strategic planning system. The goals help departments create their budget requests, so they plan for improvements in all areas, and those plans for improvements are built into their structure. Checks and balances, I kind of got the same answer. You know, they're bound by professional standards, and that ultimately the Board of Commissioners is responsible, and they feel that they're able to elect Board of Commissioner members to the Board of Commission who actually care or are very committed to the overall health and well-being of the county. One more county in North Carolina. This is Buncombe County. Buncombe is, the county seat is Asheville. You might have heard of Asheville. It's got its mountains like we do. It's a little bit larger in population than we have. But again, it has regional significance. It has a lot of recreational activities. It's similar in a lot of quality, in terms of urban-rural combination. It's very similar. Spoke with Avril Pinder, the county administrator. They have a 7-member Board of Commission. They give them a small monthly salary and health care. Some are retired, some work. The other electeds, we're seeing a pattern here in North Carolina, the sheriff and the register of deeds. They hire the county manager, the clerk of court, the DA, district attorney, the finance manager, and the tax collector, and the clerk to the board. I asked her why she felt that that form of government worked well for them. The comment was that with a long-term professional manager, they could think and plan financially. They actually plan for business continuity and have a robust emergency plan. And I'm going to come back to that point, the term business continuity and emergency operations. Finally, they have a for them too, strategic planning is built in. They have a 5-year capital plan, a 2-year staffing plan for all areas. They schedule strategic planning retreats to include the community. So they get community input on a regular basis in a very formal environment in which people can talk about what they think the strategic focus should be of the county. And she also stated quite unequivocally that county government is not a business, but it should have a business mindset. Let me just summarize and give you a little information about North Carolina history, because in talking to them, I asked them, since they seem to be organized, there's a lot of variation, but some things are very much the same, and I kind of wanted to know where that was coming from and what kind of support they got from the state. By support, I mean in information and advice and protections and that sort of thing. She provided me with a document, and I'm sharing just a little information with you. So, North Carolina, in 1929, Robeson County, North Carolina became the first county in the U.S. to adopt the county manager form of government. In 1930, Durham County, North Carolina was the second. And then it just kind of, in North Carolina, it just kind of sat there. I guess people were watching to see what happened in those two counties. By 1970, 35 counties in North Carolina were using the county manager form. By 1980, 82 counties had adopted it. Today, all 100 counties employ a full-time professional county manager in North Carolina. And I'm going to quote from a document that was provided to me. North Carolina has a long tradition of using professional managers to assist elected leaders in governing their respective communities and generally ensure that local governments operate efficiently and effectively. That's North Carolina. Now I want to talk briefly, because I mentioned to you about business continuity. I want to talk briefly about the response of a county that I'm going to show you to COVID. But I want you to think about what we've gone through here the last 18 months or so. The reason I'm on this commission is because my husband and I had an issue, and it was during COVID, and we reached out to county government, and I don't know if any of you had this experience. You'd send an email and it wouldn't get answered. You call on the phone and they'd say, I'm sorry, go to this app. You couldn't get anybody on the phone. Finally, in frustration, we called a county commissioner who helped us out by getting us in touch with somebody who was basically a staff member. So we didn't go through an elected, we didn't go through a deputy, we got right to the source and we got the problem solved. Kootenai County, it wasn't really Kootenai County's fault so much. I think the whole state of Idaho had a little difficulty in adjusting to the fact that services were disrupted. That said, I want to show you kind of a better way. This is the response to COVID in Buncombe County. That was the last county in North Carolina that I shared with you. The manager's name is Avril Pindar. They had a business continuity plan in place in addition to an incident command system. Like you might go, yeah, words, what's that mean? And I'm sorry, the definitions aren't all that helpful either. A business continuity plan is the capability of an organization to continue to deliver services at predefined acceptable levels following a disruptive incident. Well, COVID was a disruptive incident. So if you have a business continuity plan in place, you then pull that, you kind of pull that off the shelf and you keep going. You figure out a way to keep going. I'm very familiar with that because that's what you do in healthcare. You can imagine. I mean, I lived in Houston, Texas. Let's go back a few decades when we didn't have the technology we have now, and a hurricane hits, and you don't have electricity in the hospital. What the heck do? You've got patients in there. I'll tell you what you do. Management staff all show up at the hospital, and we take food trays, and we walk them up to the floors. It doesn't matter if it's a 12-story tower. And then we take trash and garbage and whatever, and we walk it back down. If you don't have ventilators working, then you've got people in 30-minute shifts bagging patients. I mean, you come up with a plan. You've got redundancy in your system so you can pull data out. That's what a business continuity plan is. Well, that's what they have in Buncombe County, so that when COVID hit, they had a way to keep county operations going, and the citizens could actually get in contact with somebody if they had a question or a need. Okay, incident command system, what's that? That's a logical management structure with defined responsibilities and clear reporting channels to unify departments to continue to provide service. Back to the hospital model. We would have an incident commander, and that was not the CEO of the hospital. That was not the CFO of the hospital. It was usually somebody who was very much tapped in to the clinical operations. Oftentimes it was a nurse. So it didn't necessarily have to be someone who had an administrative title. It was someone with a clinical title. And from that incident, you'd have someone leading it, and then you'd have a second level and a third level, and so things would get done and information would be shared. That's an incident command center. So they had both of those things in Buncombe County. The result was all of their services remained operational. People functioned from home. You still got somebody if you made a phone call, if you sent an email, if you needed something, you got a response. And they use staff across departments. And I think this is really unique, give you an idea. Okay, the libraries were closed. We know that. Here, our libraries were closed, right? What did they do? They trained the librarians as epidemiologists to keep track of what was going on in the county. They made telephone appointments. So if people wanted to get COVID testing, if they wanted to get a vaccine, I know that vaccines are one of those things that some people want, some people don't. For the people who did, it was darn difficult in the beginning to even get one here. You couldn't even get an answer as to where you could get it or when you could get it. They'd say, well, call next Wednesday at 8 o'clock. And but we have 50,000 people over in your age group, and we only have we don't have enough people to answer the phone. And I know when I was talking to somebody at Panhandle Health, I said, but yes, you would. I said, here I am sitting at home, a retired person. You think I couldn't have helped? You think there weren't hundreds of people who, if you would have given us a phone and allowed us to take the data and at least put people on a list. Anyway, I'm digressing. You can see I'm kind of passionate about it. And it was interesting to me. I didn't ask anybody about their response to COVID. I should have. I really should have, but she volunteered it. So basically, they used the librarians to expand the staff so that services could continue to be given. And the park staff were trained to drive ambulances. And they were trained to transport citizens to service, again, being services that they might need, including going to get tested or to get a vaccine. And I asked her why she thought that happened, and she says this happens when government has a business-minded management structure in place. You can deal with emergencies. Okay, Summit County. I looked long and hard, and it was until I met David Childs that I found someone who had recently gone through what we're going through, a study commission. So Summit County, Utah, went through this recently. I'm going to share that information with you. I asked why. Why did I asked Diane Foster. Diane Foster was actually a member like us. She was not part of the county. She was a person who was tapped to be one of the citizen commissioners. I asked, well, what were they looking for? What was the goal? Why was this commission formed? She said that the Board of Commissioners wanted to improve operations. The focus of change was to evaluate efficiency and effectiveness. The focus was not political ideology. It was to put politics aside and look at what was better for the citizens, the most efficient, the most effective. The Board of Commissioners wanted to reduce the administrative functions that they had to deal with and concentrate on policy. I think the third bullet point's very, very instructive. The Board of Commissioners felt they were not necessarily good at administrative functions. Those of you who have worked in administration know there's a particular mindset in terms of liking that kind of work and doing it well. And they had administrative support. They had administrative staff. They had like a coordinator. But they felt that they really needed professional expertise, not just someone to kind of do their bidding, but they wanted the advice and professional expertise. So they created a 7-person study committee in 2005. They were members from the community, like us. They were not appointed by the Board of Commissioners. They had to apply. They had an application process where people had to write in and say why they thought they would be good and what they had to offer in terms of being to provide a diverse representation of the community in terms of backgrounds. The prior form, the form that they were looking, or the form that they had and that they were looking at and comparing with a different form was a 3-member Board of Commissioners with assigned departments, like ours. They also had an elected sheriff, elected clerk, treasurer, assessor, attorney, coroner. Sound familiar? you know, that's Kootenai County. So what did they do? Da-da-da-da-da. Okay, here's the new form. Not very scary at all. They decided to have a 5-member board of commissioners. All of them have outside jobs. They're no longer bogged down in administrative minutia. Rather, they focus on policy. The work ebbs and flows. When you don't have departments that you have to manage, there are times of the year when you're very busy and times when you're not busy. And so they, if they all have other jobs, they can work around that schedule. They consider what they do as service to the community. They don't consider it a job with benefits. And they feel they're more connected to the citizens because they have more time to go out and do the things that that they weren't able to do when they get stuck in the administrative minutia. We even had some of our elected officials, or those who had been commissioners before, say that they wish they could get out more and meet with citizen groups. And we heard our previous sheriff say that he had the luxury because he had a large support staff and deputies that are able to take on components of the work that he could delegate. He could spend a lot of time. He gave us the story of going to Harrison, I think it was, and dropping in on someone who ran a shop, and that person was surprised. Well, what are you doing here, kind of thing. Well, that's what our commissioners hopefully would be able to do, and I think they want to do. But in this case, they felt that gave them that opportunity. Now, look at the second bullet. They continued to elect their sheriff, attorney, clerk, assessor, treasurer, coroner. That was their decision. But they did create a permanent county manager position. And this position has budget preparation and management authority, works with all the electeds. Now I need to get to make sure I can read all these parts here. The county manager manages the departments that the Board of Commissioners had been responsible for. It does not manage the electeds operation. So again, the sheriff manages his shop. The clerk manages his or her shop. The attorney, the assessor, everybody manages their own shop. The county manager doesn't have a place in that. But the county manager does provide consistent, experienced, managed support and expertise over time to all areas. So what they found is that at first the electeds weren't so sure they liked this idea, but then they found that this person had expertise that could actually help them too. The Board of Commissioners was pleased because they could delegate project program implementation. So even if the Board of Commissioners in their prior model would come up with a plan, a new program, then who do you delegate it to get the work done? So again, they feel that by having the 5-member Board of Commissioners and this permanent county manager, they were able to be more efficient, effective, and serve the citizens. But they chose to continue to elect all the others. Okay, let me just summarize. I know I've talked a lot here, but let me just summarize. And deal with the differences within and across counties. So in Utah, because didn't talk about some of these points, but this goes back to County Explorer. If you would go out there, you would see some of these things too. In Utah, counties have 3, 5, 7, or 9-member board of commissioners. And most of the counties in Utah have county managers. So that's what you call the commission manager form of government. I think it's interesting because, again, let's look at these and compare and contrast with Idaho. Everybody in Idaho does the same thing, but there are many, many states around the U.S. where counties decide what's right for the county, and they aren't obligated, or they don't feel obligated, that everybody in the state has to do it exactly the same way. In North Carolina, only one county, North Dakota, excuse me, only one county has a commission manager form of government. That was the one that I talked about first, and that happened very recently. Remember, that was 2015, 2018. Most of their counties, though, have either a 3 or a 5-member board of commissioners. South Dakota, it's basically the reverse. All but one county has the commission manager form of government. Now, the responsibilities and authority of the county manager varies. I kind of explained that. They have different titles and they have different levels of responsibility. But they all but one has the commission manager, and I can't tell you which county that is, I'm sorry. And the number of elected offices you saw kind of varies across counties, so they don't all have exactly the same positions that they elect. In North Carolina, all of the counties use the commission manager form of government. All of the county managers have considerable responsibility, authority, and respect. Their expertise is used by all the elected officials, especially in the financial realm. So all of the electeds use the county manager in terms of working on and developing their budgets. They can do it within their own staff, but they use the expertise. In North Carolina, the types of elected officials seems to be the same across all counties. I didn't look at every county, there's 100 counties, but they all seem to be the same. But the size of the Board of Commissioners varies. The commonalities among all of these counties. Okay, they all had a nonpartisan professional county manager. They all had a 5 or more Board of Commissioners with policy focus. They all had, and we used to call them an EAP, but anyway, they had an enterprise resource planning system, ERP system in place. Basically, what is that? That's an integrated software system that runs the entire operation, including budget, financial reporting, asset management, work orders, procurement, personnel. If you have been listening to all of these meetings, you have heard from Dina Darrow, you have heard from a lot of our elected officials. I think we heard from the 2 Nancys and Sylvia that that an integrated system would make it, that was actually state of the art, that brought us into the 21st century, would be of great benefit to Kootenai County. We don't really have that now. I think we have kind of a hodgepodge, and we have a system that, as Dina said, you know, it's basically that close to collapsing. I mean, you get to the point where you can't get upgrades to it anymore. So all of these counties, be they a wealthy county, and I'm here to tell you, North Carolina counties are pretty wealthy. We know why. North Carolina taxes their people a lot. South Dakota does not tax their people a lot, but they still have this sort of a system. Also, all of them had a strategic, long-range planning process with input from all departments to include budget projections, capital planning, IT support, salary reviews, and citizen contribution. Continue. They all describe less partisanship among the elected officials. And here's why. Because all the electeds participated in the strategic planning. Department goals were tied to the budget. Were there disagreements? Oh yeah. There were significant disagreements. But the electeds all saw the value in budget management not being political. And we heard from the folks who came to talk to us how, well, you know, I asked for this and I asked for this. Well, I didn't get this, but they got that. And you know, you need an overall plan so that everybody gets what they need. You might have to do it in some sort of an order, but that's what they're doing. And the manager does support the Board of Commissioners directly, but it supports the other elected officials indirectly through advice and financial information and assistance with the budget and assistance with goals and planning. And all reported that the county should be managed with business principles, but we're very clear, it's not a business. And we've had that discussion amongst our group. It's not a business. It's county government, but it should be managed, they felt, with business principles. It's not a business because it's a public process and there are open meeting laws. It's not a business because it's service-oriented. There's not a profit at the end of it. And it's not a business because it needs to be responsive to citizens. So those were the commonalities amongst the counties that I shared with you. All right, finally, you've come to the end, folks. I want to give my thanks to my fellow research subcommittee members, to Bob Fish and Phil Ward. We had meetings. We would talk on the phone. We would share information. My primary focus was to contact other counties and to prepare this report. Their primary focus, I did some of the literature search also. Their primary focus was to do the literature searches, and we will be sharing some of that information with you. It just didn't, it didn't kind of fit with what I was trying to do at this point, and it's already 6:35. So, and we have another speaker, so we really, in the interest of time, needed to not pull that together. But I finally want to give special thanks to our guest. David Childs has had experience as both a city and county manager, and he is a resident of Kootenai County. I'll let him tell you the rest of his story, but he's a voter just like you and me, and he has a commitment to this community just like we all do. But one last slide. I want to thank you. I want to thank you for listening. This is my granddaughter, Emmeline Hope, and I know she was very enthusiastic about my presentation. I'm not seeing anybody else with this kind of excitement, but I hope you found what I had to say informative. And I realize I'm to be speaking to my group here, but I kept finding myself looking at you because I really do care that you know that we're all here doing our best on behalf of the county. Thank you.
All right, that's it for me. So I'm Dave Childs, and as Kristin said, I live in Kootenai County. The reason I came to Kootenai County goes back to like I grew up in Minnesota, but the reason I came to Kootenai County, my wife and I, goes back to like 1967. I was 16 years old. I was a Boy Scout. I went to the World Jamboree here in Farragut Park and remembered that. And when it came time to retire a number of years ago, we came up to Coeur d'Alene and bought a house the first weekend we were here, like a lot of people have done. So we've been here almost 8 years. Absolutely love it. We're committed to this community. We have a section of the highway that the two of us have adopted as Adopt a Highway. We're part of the Medical Reserve Corps. We're not medical people, but we've tried to help out with the Medical Reserve Corps, and we're committed to the community. So what I'm going to do real quickly, though, is I'm going to talk a little bit about who I am and why I'm here, and I started that a little bit, but then I'm going to give you some thoughts on, and again, I didn't see Kristin's presentation. The only real connection I had with what she presented was I told her about Summit County, Utah, because I had done some work with Summit County, Utah back in 2005 and 2006 when they were working on that. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is just speak from my own experience. Nobody sent me here. In fact, back you were talking about trouble getting through to the county. Back last fall when they were asking for applicants for this commission, I sent something in and never heard back, so I thought, okay, fine. And then I watched the commission, or the study committee work, and read the papers and followed it. And this spring, I think I sent another email saying, I have some experience that might be useful and background in terms of working in 7 different forms of government and being able to at least compare and contrast the strengths and weaknesses of those forms of government. I didn't hear anything back, and I finally was able to connect a few months ago, maybe a month ago or so. And I'm just here because I care about my community, because I have some experience, and I'd like to at least talk to you a little bit about it. And it's just information. You can take it and use it or not. That's fine. But it's but I do have that experience. So I'm going to give you some thoughts on what the number of county board members should be. I think it's 5, and I think they should be part-time, but I'll come back and tell you why. I think the sheriff and prosecutor should be elected, and I'll come back and talk a little bit about why I feel that way. I think the idea of a county manager is a good idea, and I'll talk a little bit about why that is and what advantages that might bring. And then I'll talk a little bit about the other electeds and and some ideas about it. I'm not sure I have an opinion one way or the other, but maybe talk about some pros and cons of whether there are changes or how you might be able to do things a little bit differently in terms of consolidating functions and offices and avoiding duplication, those kinds of things. So, first of all, again, I said I grew up in Minnesota. The little town I grew up in was Waseca, and I remember in high school they had a city manager, a town of 5,800 people, and they had a county manager, county coordinator they called it at the time, and that led me, somehow watching that county manager, the city manager, led me to my profession. I got a master's degree at Minnesota State University in urban studies, and one of my first jobs was the planner in a joint city and county planning department in Austin, Minnesota, the home of Hormel, and that was Mower County. They had a 3-member county board of commissioners and a joint planning department, and I was in that planning department, and so I was able to work and see how 3 commissioners worked. My next job, I was the planning director in Casa Grande, Arizona, and that was a city, and that had 7 council members and a city manager, worked in that form of government. My first job as a city administrator was in Blue Earth, Minnesota, a town of about 4,000 people, basically, but it was a full-service town. It had police, fire, water, sewer, parks, an airport, economic development, all the kinds of things that a city, it had an electric utility and even a municipal phone company, and so back then it had a lot of things, and I was 23, 24 at the time. This is back in the late 70s. You know, and I remember the mayor said to me, "Well, Dave, we're going to hire you, and we know you don't know much, but we don't know much either, and we'll all learn together, and in a few years you'll move on to a bigger town, and we'll hire another young person." Well, it was the best growth experience of my life, and the reason I say that is the way you get to become a skilled city manager, county manager, administrator is certainly education, but it's the on-the-ground work. It's responding to floods and tornadoes and all of the issues that cities and counties face. And so over the last 43 years, I was able to do that and respond to these issues and work with organizations and do union contracts and respond to Superfund issues and chemical spills and you know, political issues and growth or the lack of growth and development and redevelopment, all the kinds of things that cities and counties have to deal with. So the reason I volunteered to come and talk to you was because I had these opportunities to work in different places. So my next job was in the Twin Cities area, city of St. Anthony, about 8,000 people. You'll see a pattern. I'm moving up a little bit. Some folks in our profession go to a community or a county and stay and grow with the county. Some of them move and go to the next larger community, and somehow that's how my career went. I would take a job in a next larger community to advance my career. That's kind of how it worked. So St. Anthony was 8,000 people. It had, Minnesota's different. We had municipal liquor. So I actually ran, as part of the city, we ran 2 bars and 2 package stores and had happy hours and all those kinds of things that the private sector does, but this is what the city ran because that's the way the government was there, and it was about 40% of our budget, the profits from the liquor stores. So I had those opportunities. Then the next community up, and while I was there, we we had a horrible tornado, took out a good chunk of town, and you were talking about emergency management and being prepared. We had just come back from the National Fire Academy. The mayor, myself, the police chief, the fire chief, and the public works director had spent a week at the fire academy, and I think a month later we had this horrible tornado. But because we had that training, because we were able to go through the scenarios and understand what needed to happen, we were able to handle this horrendous situation in our community. And so that the skill of a manager and a management team that works together, that's critical. And one of the things that Kootenai County could do better, in my mind, and what I've heard from the presentations, is that coordination between departments. How do you pull the departments together, get them talking to each other? How do you integrate the software, integrate the systems in a way that when you really need folks to come forward and get things done, you're able to do that. That's part of management. The other part of it, of course, is creating strategic plans. What's it going to look like 1, 2, 5, 10 years down the road? How can you, so for example, Kootenai County is going through some growth, and a lot of folks are not happy about the growth. And so that's one side of the equation. Well, a manager can probably come in and help you understand what options you have, legal options to control the growth. But on the other side, some of it's going to happen. And if you don't plan for the growth, 10 years down the road, somebody's going to say, who's the idiot 10 years ago that didn't plan for the growth that we're experiencing today?
Like all our ranches disappearing.
Well, so you've got a double-edged sword. You've got to do both. If growth is too fast, you better figure out how to deal with it. But some of it's still going to happen, and if you don't plan for it, 10 years, 20 years down the road, you're going to pay a price because you didn't. One of the things that a lot of communities have done, acquire open space. Maybe we should be acquiring open space right now, trying to find a way to work out deals with farmers, some sort of arrangement where they have a conservation easement, they get to continue to farm until they're ready to retire, and at that point in time, the public gets to get some of that land so that we create open space that stays. These are sort of ideas that a manager could bring to the table and work with the county board to do. After St. Anthony, I went to the town of New Brighton, also in Minneapolis suburbs, about 25,000 population. Then probably the best job, and those two, St. Anthony and New Brighton, were both council manager forms, 5 council members elected at large, not by district, mayor elected separately, and a city manager. When I went to Minnetonka, they had a little bit different situation. Minnetonka's on the western side of the Twin Cities, 55,000 people or so, 28 square miles, and they had what's called a home rule charter. The home rule charter provided for the mayor and 2 council members to be elected at large, and then 4 council members to be elected by district. So there were 4 ward council members and 3 at-large council members, 7-member council. And that was really kind of a good way to do things because the folks, as you were talking about, folks got to vote for 4 people. If I'm in ward number 1, I vote for the mayor and the 2 at-large council members and my own ward council member. So I get to vote for 4 of the 7. And what it also did is a lot of times if you just have ward council members, you get these little turf wars. I'm trying to get the goodies for my district, and I'm trying to get the goodies for my district. And this allowed the group to really work together and spend a lot more time looking at the what's best for the city. And so, again, my experience there went till the year 2000, and we moved to South Lake Tahoe, California. California is a different place, and South Lake Tahoe is not really California. It's right on the border of California and Nevada, and it's just kind of an interesting place. But what I wanted to talk about, though, was the position after that was with the International City Management Association. I was the West Coast or Western U.S. director. And what that meant was, and I'll tell you about what ICMA is, but I basically worked with city and county managers in the 14 western states. So North and South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, Idaho, did I say Idaho? Washington, Oregon, California, and Alaska. So that was my territory. I worked with 1,500 managers in those areas. And the things that I worked on with them was leadership and management training, performance measurement, so that in your organization, measuring how the performance is of the police department, the fire department, the public works, all of those kinds of things, creating measures so that you could improve the efficiency, the response times, whatever it was, the customer service for those organizations, and also did a significant amount of training on our code of ethics. So let me tell you a little bit about ICMA. ICMA stands for the International City County Management Association. The organization has about 12,000 members. If you may or may not be familiar, but there's an organization called the IACP, International Association of Chiefs of Police, and there's one International Association of Firefighters. They all say international, but they're mostly U.S. They might have some members from Canada and a few members from other countries. ICMA, International City County Management Association, is the same. It's mostly the U.S. It has a few members from Canada, and we have some members from 40 countries around the world, but it's mostly U.S. managers, assistant managers, department heads who have joined. They agree to abide by a strict code of ethics, and I can talk about that if you'd like. We have a program of credentialing where we make, and I'm a credentialed manager. I went through a process to get a credential, and so that we hope distinguishes us from others who maybe don't have it requires experience and education and continued ed. We hopefully it's a credential that when we go and interview for a position in a city or a county, it at least gives us some credibility that we have the experience and the credentials and the code of ethics, so that you can understand what you're going to hire. And I did want to say, I made a note here. Kristin talked about, she used the word permanent manager. And I think what you meant was that the position in the job description is permanent.
Right.
But,
Not the individual.
But folks like me, who are hired as a city manager, if there are 5 members on the board, if 3 of them tell me to go away, I'm done. And that's how it worked. And for the first 20 years of my career, that meant no contract, no employment agreement. If the council decided or board decided to go in a different direction and they wanted a different manager, a 3-2 vote, and I would be gone. Fortunately, I was never dismissed during my 43 years, but it does happen. It's kind of like football coaches when they get tired of you, or management changes or whatever. You can be gone. Right now, it's more common that there's an employment agreement. It's not as robust. You're typically not as robust of an agreement as what you might have for a school superintendent. They have, I'll just say this, they have better agreements than city and county managers do, and part of it, I think, is just our philosophy. We are nonpartisan. Our code of ethics requires that we not take part in political activities, donate to campaigns. That has saved me so much money over the years, where a council member or somebody will come in and say, hey, can you contribute to my campaign? And I'll point to the code of ethics on my wall and say, see number four there, it says I can't contribute to your campaign. I am so sorry, but so I've never belonged to a political party, so I'm politically neutral, and that's how, as a manager, my job, and again, most of the small or the local governments that are small ones, not the New Yorks or Chicago's or whatever, tend to be nonpartisan elections. So my job and my peers, folks like me, when there's a new council elected or a new county board elected, our job is to work with the board. Our job is to provide them with recommendations on policy issues and to give them options, not just to say, well, here's what you should do, but actually to provide them with some research, provide them with some documentation about how, what their options are and their choices, and then, and this is the important part, and then when they decide, our job to make sure it gets done, not to fight it, not to take it in our own direction, but when the board speaks, our job is then to take the direction of the board and move that policy forward and make it succeed. That's the ethic of my profession. The other piece I wanted to talk a little bit about is, I've heard folks talk about, well, the manager might have too much power. And I want to use two words. There's the word power, and power is what the county board has. They have the power to make the decisions. They have the power to make the final decisions. And what the manager would have, if you had a manager here, is authority. The board gives some authority to the manager to do the things that need to be done, but the power rests with the board. And I want to make sure that's real clear because again, I don't consider myself, and I'm putting myself back in my last job, I don't consider myself a person with power. But if the board gives me authority, then my job, and it can be very challenging sometimes with counties, is to try to get the various elected department heads to work together. And so there's a difference between a city manager and a county manager from the standpoint of the county manager needs to have twice as many collaborative skills as the city manager. When I was a city manager and I had a police chief that I hired and a fire chief that I hired and a finance director and a parks and rec director and a public works director and a city engineer and a water and sewer director, and I hired them all, and the city attorney. They report to me, they're responsible to me, and I can manage that pretty well as a manager and administrator. When you have a county administrator or manager and an elected sheriff and an elected prosecutor and a coroner and all of those, and I'll get to Washoe County in a little bit, you get all of those, they have their own departments that they're running, and I think you had a slide there that actually touched at it. They have their own departments, they have their own authorities, and the job of the manager then is how do you work with them in a way that you can help add value to the work that they're doing in their departments, find ways to knock down the silos between departments so there's cooperation, integrate the systems, whether they're software systems or customer service systems or whatever the systems are, and get them integrated in a way that actually makes the county more efficient and more customer-centric and more responsive. And so the ability to be collaborative and actually work hand in hand with the sheriff and hand in hand with the coroner and hand in hand with the assessor is a skill that's a little bit different for county managers than it is for a city manager. So that's one distinction. Where did I leave off? I left off with the International City County Management Association, and I'm the Western U.S. Director working with city and county administrators. So it gave me an opportunity to work with folks in a number of different states, in a number of different communities, understand the problems and concerns and issues that they had, and to help them with leadership and management training, those kinds of things. My next job, and the one I think is fairly applicable to this one, to this county, was Washoe County, Nevada. Washoe County is Reno, which is 200,000 people, so it's a little bit bigger than here. Sparks, which is 100,000, and then a little bit of Lake Tahoe, Incline Village, and some of those areas, and then about 100,000 people that were in the unincorporated part of the county. And so my job, I was the assistant county manager, and my job was to handle all the urban services. So we had water and sewer, an airport, public works, parks, and museums and the development services, planning and engineering, and permitting and all those kinds of things. When I got there in 2007, I think in my department, we had about 565 employees. The county had about 3,300, and the budget was $750 million. So it's a big county. And in Nevada, the human services piece was a large part of the county, and in Idaho, the state handles a lot of those human services. So that was a piece. So we had the county manager, my boss, Katie Simon. I think there were 11 elected department heads, and then 5 county board members. And during that downturn, the ability to collaborate with all of these departments, all of whom were trying to hold on to their staff, because we had to go from about 3,300, 3,500 maybe, to 2,200. So, I mean, we lost 1,000 employees. I had days when I sat at a table with 7 or 8 building officials and laid them all off at the same time. It's just wrenching stuff. And then 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later, again, it was a fast growth area. We had to lay some more off. It was really hard stuff. And so if you think about that dynamic, and then, and again, I'm not picking on anybody, but the district attorney would say, well, you're not taking any of my people. And the sheriff would say, well, we got issues with crime. You can't take any of my people. And we had to cut, a couple $100 million out of the budget. So it was the ability, again, to collaborate with those department heads and get everybody together to understand what we had to do to make it work. It was a wonder to watch my boss, Katie, do what she did. I mean, she was a world-class manager. She did a great job, and I learned a ton from her. And those are the kinds of people that you would be looking for if you had a county manager here. Somebody that has the experience, somebody that's collaborative, somebody that can get all of those disparate views together, get folks in the room and actually do strategic planning, think about the future and get everybody on the same page, kind of like this slide was up there. I didn't see the slide before, but I could have used your slides. So Washoe County was sort of an example of how you can have a number of elected officials and it still works, but it also leads me to my conversation about what could be better. And in a couple of Kristin's examples, the county made a decision to keep the sheriff and the district attorney, and I would absolutely support that. I think that makes tons of sense. There's really no reason to mess with that. For those other elected officials, the assessor, the coroner, et cetera, one thought would be, and as I read the statute, there are ways to sort of guarantee that these folks can serve through the end of their term, and maybe there's a way that you could do some transitioning to consolidate some offices or find some savings in all of that, and still have. Let me back up. From what I can tell, the current elected department heads all are competent in the areas that they serve. That's not always the case, and it doesn't have to be the case. Somebody could run to be treasurer and not know anything about being a treasurer because they've got a chief deputy. And somebody could run for coroner and not know anything about being a medical examiner, but because they'd have somebody hired to do the work. And so right now, while you have these folks who are competent, there's probably a way that you could at least think about, and maybe it's the commissioners that have to think about, how do you just transition them into a permanent position because they have the skills. And so I just want to lay that out as a thought. That's probably the most controversial thing that I would mention, but I would also suggest that you move to 5 board members, and you recommend 5 board members, and that they be part-time. And I'll give you a couple of thoughts about that. Number one, under the current system, you've got 3 bosses trying to run departments, and none of us wants 3 bosses. You know, trying to, and they all have to work together because they can't break into a group of 2 to have a conversation about it because of the open meeting laws and all that kind of thing. So they have to work as a group, and the only place they can work as a group is basically right up here. How do you run departments from up here? If you had 5 and they were part-time, and I really recommend they be part-time, and an administrator or a county manager, then they provide the guidance, they have the power, they give the authority to the manager gets those things done, gets out, gets among the departments, deals with those issues. To me, that makes a lot of sense, and that would be my suggestion. Based on my experience, based on what she just did for research, it works. In Minnesota and Wisconsin, you saw lots of dark blue on both of those, not blue from a partisan, because they're both right. They're purple, kind of. Anyway, so but the blue from the chart was about that there were county administrators or county managers in both of those states, and just about every county. The little county I grew up in was a total of 20,000 people, but they had a county administrator and a 5-member county board, and it worked. And so I just want to say I think that's something to really give some thought to is 5 and part-time. And you saw up there a lot of folks paid $1,000 a month. That's been my experience through most of my career. Is the electeds that I've worked with, excuse me, we're not career politicians. And you know, everybody hates to hear the word career politicians. Well, the city councils and the county board members that I worked with were not career politicians. They ran because they cared about their community. They ran because that they wanted to give back. Most of them, well, all of them, were either retired or had another job. This was not their job because you can't really live on $1,000 or $800 or $500 a month. Some of them, that's what they got, which leads me to, and again, personal opinion. One of the things that happened over the years that I think has not helped us in attracting folks who are not career politicians is that insurance. Over the years, I've worked with some city council members and county board members. The only reason they ran was because they needed the insurance. And that turned them into career politicians. I mean, because they ran for the insurance, not for the service to the community. That's what this should be about. Local government is right here on all our doorsteps. You know, this is you know, we know our neighbors. We know the people that you know, serve us on our city councils or our public works employees or parks people. They're our neighbors. And so we're close to each other. And so if you one of the complaints I thought I heard or read in the paper was that folks said, well, you know, we're having a hard time attracting good people, or we want to make sure we attract good people. Well, what I'd say is the way you attract good people would be make them part-time, because that expands the pool. You're not going to get a lot of folks who will give up a full-time job to become a county commissioner or a county supervisor, depending on the state. And when they do, they become a career politician almost by definition. And so then, if you paid pay them $1,000 a month or whatever it is. It at least recognizes their service. But again, my personal bias, don't do the insurance, because then folks run just for the insurance and then they can't afford to lose next time around because they can't afford to lose the insurance, so they spend their whole time campaigning so that they don't lose next time. And it's like, well, is that what we're looking for, or is it the folks out here who have some time and have some interest and have another life, but they're willing to come up here and be the board of directors for the county? That's what the job should be. The job should be board of directors, not the folks that run the day-to-day operation. And if you're the board of directors, again, you have the power and you have some folks who serve you and give you the information you need. One other thing that I had heard from the paper was sort of a frustration from some of the staff people that, oh man, the officials change so often and then we have to train them again. And my answer to that would be, that's our job. That's our job to say, okay, you come in, we want to help you be successful. Then the question I would always ask every city council member is, all right, so when you stand for election in 4 years, what do you want to say your accomplishments are? What do you want to accomplish? And I talked to all of them, and then I'd help them, even if they had conflicting objectives. I'd help them try to at least find a place where everybody got some of what they came for. And that was always good for the public because they came to make things better. So this idea of having new people come in and having to kind of get them up to speed, that's our job. That's our job to help you understand how the budget works. And it's our job to help you understand what power you have and how you can use it. It's not to sandbag and say, well, yeah, we're not going to tell you anything, and you can, that's not what we do. That's not what we do. So I want to mention that, and let me think. Yeah, just to summarize, again, nobody sent me here. I came on my own. Because I care about my community, and in fact, I just told you I worked for like 7 or 8 different cities over the years, and some folks would have said, well, you're just kind of a carpetbagger. You go from place to place and work, work for cities and move kind of willy-nilly. So I want to tell you a final story, and then I'll quit. So this is 10, 12 years ago. My wife and I are driving through Minneapolis, and we're going around the freeway on the west side of Minneapolis, and we go past the city of Minnetonka. The sign's there, and it says Minnetonka. And I said, "Oh, look, honey, we're going through my little town." And she said, "You moron. You've been gone from here for 7 years. This isn't your little town anymore." And so we're driving along, and we come around the loop, and now we go through New Brighton, and we're going, "Honey, I'm going through my other little town." And she said, "Oh, shut up. You've been gone from there for 15 years. It's like, okay. And so then we drive around and we go past St. Anthony's. "I'm going through my little town." And she goes, "No, you're not." And I said, "Yes, I am. These will always be my little town. These will always, every place I work, I put part of my heart into it. And every one of my colleagues does that too. We put down roots. We buy a home. We have a family. We raise the family, and we want to make our town better. That's what we do." And I'm sorry, sometimes I leak. But it's because I care. But they'll always be our little towns. And I hope that if and when the day comes that the commission says they'd like to see a county manager, I'd be happy to help with that process of writing a job description or whatever I can do. I'm 70 years old. I don't want the job. I'm not here because I want a job. I'm not here because I have somebody I'm trying to find a job for. I'm here because I think I think it's a good thing for the county. I've heard folks say, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And every saying has a reverse. And the other one is, out with the old, in with the new. Well, I don't believe either of those. I think that our job, running our local governments or whatever, is every day to go in and try to do a little bit better. Try to make it a little bit better. And I think about and you got some of you got hair like mine. Remember when they switched from bias ply tires to radial tires? Man, I didn't know if I liked that or not. Well, it turns out, that wasn't so bad once you got used to it. And then they added ABS to the car. And I hated that when it went like this all the time until it saved my life a couple times, So make it just a little bit better every day. Make it a little bit better. So that's what I hope this process does, is looks at the county and says, this plan's been in place since 1899. There weren't even cars back then, there weren't radios, there weren't computers, there wasn't any of that kind of stuff. And so maybe we need to just modernize a little bit. We don't have to throw it all out, but that's why I'm here, to say maybe now's the time to just kind of see if we can make it a little bit better. And it doesn't have to be disruptive. I think that the sheriff and I are probably on the same page with this, and so I echo some of his comments, and now I'll shut up. So thank you for listening.
Thank you both. It's, about 7:15? Let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break. We'll reconvene about 7:25.
I'm for that.
move on to questions from the subcommittee for either Kristin or Dave Childs. Phil, would you like to start?
Mr. Childs, thank you so much for being here. The information and your background is just really informative and something we haven't heard from most of the other people because they're all part of the typical commission form and so on. One of the things that I've heard repeatedly, though, from people in emails over the past 4 or 5 months is the concern that if we get away from as many elected officials, particularly the elected row officers, not all of them, but some of them, and bring in a manager, whether it's a legally defined county manager or some type of management position, that the public loses some of its accountability by not being able to elect some of these people, and then a non-elected manager can kind of take charge and isolate them off. Can you try to address how you
Sure.
see that or why it's
I
not
think,
the case?
and it's a good question. I guess one of the elements that was what I would recommend is to make the county board bigger, and that's one way then to provide 5 choices then instead of 3 of elected officials plus the sheriff and the district attorney. And I'm not saying not to elect the rest of those folks. And I don't have the full list, but not to. But I'm saying that the possibility exists, and if you're really trying to create, an organization that's professional and it continues to do better and better, the possibility exists that you're going to get somebody to be the assessor who's not an assessor and doesn't understand it, and who spends their entire time campaigning for the next office as opposed to paying attention to the work that needs to be done. And so, I guess I'm not saying don't elect them, but I'm just saying there may be some advantages to hiring those folks. One of the advantages, and I didn't mention it, I mentioned that, a guy like me you can fire, if there's 5 and there's 3 votes and they don't like me, they can fire me.
Right.
If there's a elected, and I don't want to pick on anybody, so let's call it the weed killer person. Yeah, the weed killer guy or woman, okay? And they're elected. And things aren't going well. The public doesn't know that. Inside the organization, folks know what's going on, but the public doesn't know. And so if you have a manager and a hired person, the hired weed killer person, first thing the manager does, works with HR and tries to do a performance improvement plan and try to help them do better and try to make things work out. But if it doesn't, you find a way to move them to a different position or they're gone. And what do I call it? Help them find a new career. That's what I always called it. Or if that person's elected and the public doesn't really know what's going on, if they're a good campaigner, that's all it takes to get reelected because of name recognition and campaigning. So I'm not arguing that it's not good to have these folks be elected. I'm just saying that there is an accountability that you can gain that because again the public doesn't see a lot of what happens behind the scenes, and most organizations, I hate to say it, but most organizations, folks don't feel free to talk out of school, quote unquote, and so things get perpetuated, and you don't get the efficiency you could otherwise get. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but I that's one answer.
Tamara, questions?
Thank you both. Kristin, I guess this one's for you. Interesting on all the different cities, but did you happen to, pardon? Counties, thank you.
Yeah.
Did you happen to look at any that do the 3, 5, or 7, which are what our options are, without a county manager and talk to any of those county officials?
I did not find any. I did there. Well, that's not actually true. You could find an obscure one here and there, like North Dakota or whatever. These tend to be places that have populations of, like, the county has a population of 3,000 people. I mean, they're just not equivalent. So I didn't want to pick counties that were primarily metropolitan, and I didn't want to pick one that was so small that they wouldn't have any of the issues that we have. So within the parameters that I was looking at, I didn't find any. Now, are there some out there? Probably, but as you saw, there were 3,069 counties, and I really did put a lot of time and effort in this, but I did not go county by county, and nor did I go on to a website for each of these counties to find that out. That part, I did not.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah.
And the map that she had up, there were large swaths where there were no county administrators.
Yeah.
Most of those counties probably have 5,000 people total in them. And so there's probably a county clerk that runs the show in those counties. And they do a wonderful job, but it's a different order of magnitude of the kind of work that gets done in a county of 5,000 and one of 200,000 like the one we're in.
Okay, so I want to verify, so your numbers were about 60% of all counties have a county manager.
No, 63% have a county manager or a county executive, and that executive could be elected. What I was trying to do was distinguish between the executive branch and the legislative branch. Our current county commissioners wear both hats.
Correct.
So that's all I was trying to do.
Okay.
If you're going to look at strictly the county manager title, not elected, then it was about 40%.
40% of the counties have a non-elected county manager, a hired county
Well,
manager.
yeah, and you'd have to throw a few, I'd have to look at my numbers here, but there are some counties that have an elected executive, and that elected executive has chosen to hire a county manager in addition. You will find that, so for example,
Bigger counties.
in bigger counties. I come, before moving here, I lived in Texas. Texas has a very different system. They hire their county executive, and they call that person a judge. It isn't a judge in the sense of a court system, but they call them a judge. And there are, I think, 3, 4, 5, something like that, counties, like the county that has Dallas in it, the county that has San Antonio in it. So that county elected county executive has chosen to also have a hired county manager because of the size and scope.
Can I ask total how many you talked to? I mean, you gave us, what was that, 10, 9? How many you actually or is that the entirety?
No,
Or
I
the
talked to about 12, but some of them ended up being way too. I started to reach up. Basically, what happened is I started to go through the state of South Dakota, and then I realized there aren't enough hours in the day for me to do this. I'm going to have to now go back and look at counties that seem. I need to be strict with the counties that meet the criteria of being comparable to Kootenai. Because some of those counties, had, like Dave said, 5,000 people. What was interesting, though, is when you look around the country and you just click on some of these, the size of the county and the number of commissioners, really, it doesn't seem to matter. You'll have very small counties that have of 5 commissioners or more. In fact, I was just telling someone at the break that there's one county, it's called Marathon County, Wisconsin, and they have 38 members of their legislative branch. That doesn't include the other electeds. So there are like all these models out there, and some are like really, really over the top. I mean, how would you like to be voting for 30? And that was a county that actually, if I recall, wasn't any bigger than Kootenai County. So it's almost like you'd have a county commissioner on every block. Your next door neighbor would be one, and then then Dave's next door neighbor and your next door neighbor. So there's all sorts of models out there, and that's part of what I wanted to show, that there is not a one size fits all. Each county needs to decide within their state statutes what really works best for them. And that some counties, as you saw with North Carolina, they started out with one county, then another county, then there was a gap of many years, and then a bunch more counties, because they looked at it and thought, that's working. Maybe we'll try it. So the whole state went that way. But that's not what's happening in South Dakota. Well, it almost is. There was only one county that did not have the county manager, and that was a very tiny county. And then in North Dakota, what's anecdotal, I'm sorry, you get me on these topics and I can go on and on forever, because I met some really nice people out there. The gentleman, I think his name was Kevin Pipple, that I spoke with in Cass County, North Dakota, was recruited from Minnehaha County, South Dakota. He was in the kind of management echelon. He was not the county manager, but he was in that group. So he had been exposed to that, and they recruited him to come and be their county manager when they converted to that system in 2018. So not only are counties looking within their states to see what other counties are doing, but they're looking across states. And so I think you're going to see that there might be an interest now over time with maybe more counties looking at this. Because there are a lot of them out there now, and there are a lot of examples. And you can pick and choose from the examples and decide what works for your county.
Brian, any questions? Dave, any questions?
Maybe it's a general question. I'm still trying to get my head around how it would work with a county manager. And you talked about there's power and there's authority. You can't delegate. You don't delegate your power. You delegate your authority. But how does it work when the county commissioners are required to do certain mandated roles? You know, and I say mandated, that may not be actually a correct way of thinking about it. Let's use something I know about, like land use planning. Okay, today the planning commission does their thing and then does their public hearing and approves something that will go to the county commissioners. The county commissioners would have their public hearing and approve it. Under the scenario today, David Callahan reports directly to the county commissioners, and they're aware of what's going on, and they're briefed throughout the whole process of what's going on. Not to make any kind of deliberation about it, but just to let it know what's coming forward in the future. With the county manager, David Callahan would theoretically work for the county manager. So who does the public hearing? And if they're part-time, who does that? How does it work in some of the states or counties that you've worked?
Well, and maybe the best way to think about that would be to think about the cities around here who have an elected council, and they have a planning commission, and they have a community development director, and they have a city manager. The public works, or the community development director still runs the public hearing, because that's his or her function. The city manager or county manager, whichever is going to be, is the person that supervises the departments. It doesn't, that's not the person that does the planning function. That's a separate function. And so again, in fact, I think it was Summit County. Did they call the chairman of the county board the mayor?
No.
They had a funny name. They had some different terminology used, but where they were going in their thinking was, and this was, Summit County is Park City. I don't think you mentioned that.
Right.
It's Park City.
You're right. I didn't always mention it.
I think their idea was to operate kind of like Park City operates, and so you have the elected body, you have an administrator who runs the departments. In the case of the county, not all the departments because of the electeds, but all of the other functions that are on here, which is, there's a lot of stuff that's happening at the county, and to ask that 3-member board to manage all that, it doesn't make any sense to me, because most of them aren't trained to run these departments, and so they come in and they've got this big learning curve. So I don't think it interferes with the board's ability to do what they need to do, or the department's ability to approach the board and work with the board on whatever the topic might be.
So the board would still do the public hearing,
Sure,
and the board would have to be educated on what they're evaluating.
sure.
So
And
there'd
so-
be-
yeah,
But there'd be somebody between.
But typically, there's a staff report. That staff report is
Right, but
prepared by
today, today the staff reports directly to the county commissioners. Under the scenario of a county manager, it would report to the county manager. So would the county manager begin providing information to the county commissioners on what the director of community development is proposing and preparing them
If-
for the public
My
hearing?
experience would be on one like that. No, the development director would brief the board, prior to the hearing.
It would
There-
be a-
The memo might say to the board from the development director through the county manager, but I mean, that's the paperwork. But as a practical matter, the board needs to know what's gonna happen, and the development director is gonna be the one, the manager's not gonna have all the details, but they're gonna be in the loop. That's the other piece, they're gonna be in the loop, and the manager's there to, maybe help with some of the issues of public engagement and public involvement. Sometimes, and I don't know the planner here, but sometimes planners get a little too close to their case, and it's good to have that third party to kind of give perspective to things. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but.
Thank you.
Actually, if I could add to that too, I'm going to give the example of healthcare in the organizations that I was in. I mean, I had a number of staff. I had 24 staff that reported up to me. But when it was time to give reports to the faculty, to the chair, to other health hospital administrators, to hospital administration, to the VP level, I would not have presumed to give that report for them. I trusted my people to do their jobs. I was there as a liaison. I was there as a guide and a mentor. I had management skills that could help them, but I wasn't the content expert. And so the content expert still is the one that gives the report, and still has, is still the one you want to give the report. Managers, administrators move in and move out. You know when to do that, but the best thing is you delegate, and you appreciate being able to delegate, and you just try to give your staff the tools that they need, and kind of run interference, but they stand up there and speak for themselves.
Bruce, questions?
Yes, this one is for Kristin. First of all, thank you for your presentation. I know that you, Bob, and Phil put a lot of time and effort into this. One of the things that you didn't mention was the state legislatures, because they have relationships with the counties in different states, and that wasn't brought up at all. So I assume there was a reason for that. But I understand the value of having a manager. And one of the things that concerns me about this commission and its legitimacy is the fact that we know that Ada County has a COO, and they seem to be making that work for them. And I'm just curious why that was not included as part of the jurisdictions to interview, just to have a comparison, but why it wasn't in your presentation.
It was not in my presentation because Ada County is nothing like Kootenai County. Let me read for you, and I pulled this off the internet. Ada County has reached a population of 502,970 people in 2020, with the majority, 87.8%, living in one of the county's 6 cities. It's actually more than that. It's basically an urban county because of the, of those living in unincorporated Ada County, 78.4% are estimated to live within an area of city impact. What that means is like a planned community. They list them: Avamore, Cartwright Ranch, Dry Creek Ranch, Hidden Springs. So basically, that means that only 2.6% of the population of Ada County actually live in the county, only. And so I didn't do it because I had looked at these statistics. It didn't really fit the model. Ada County, and I think also the point I was trying to make, Bruce, is that what they've made work for Ada County, which is the capital of our state is in Ada County. I don't think Ada County runs like Kootenai County. I don't think they have the same issues. They have probably different issues. They might have a legislator sitting as their neighbor, and they'll have a county commissioner on the other side, and they might have. I mean, it's a very different. It's a very different animal. So it's not that I didn't want to include it. I really think it's more important to look at counties that are like Kootenai and try and see what they've done and why they've done it. That's all.
Well, it makes sense, except for the state legislature part.
Well, let me comment on that too. I tried to be clear that each of these states has different statutes. They run differently. They give the authority that they give to the counties differs. I'm not a political scientist. I didn't have another, what would it be, 1,000 hours to put into this. And so I did not look at that because we have information based on state statute of what we can look at. So I'm assuming that within our state, we can choose one of those, however many that there were. That's already been vetted by the state. How we actually organize ourselves we have to keep that in mind. We can't look like North Carolina or any of those counties. We can't look like South Dakota in any of those counties. We can't look like North Dakota. We can't look like Utah. We're all different. All of the states except for Utah fall under Dillon's rule. So we know that that's kind of the underlying platform, you might say, in terms of how the counties are organized and the relationship of the county to the state. Utah is under something called Hutchinson's rule, and I actually printed out the definition of it. It's a little bit quirky. I would need probably a little legal advice to make sure I truly understood it. I used a county in Utah anyway, just because I thought it would be of interest to everybody here to have the story of a county that's recently gone through it. Now, but no, I didn't look at the legislature. That was not what I thought I could do within the confines of the time, or that I needed to in terms of what the options that were available to us. I don't know if you've got anything.
Well, just that, again, I didn't do your research or anything, but I know that, Idaho has very specific statutes about what this commission can do. I do have the one for Utah in front of me, because I had worked on the stuff in Utah, and they have different forms of government are a county commission, and that's a 3-member commission, expanded county commission, which is 5 or 7, executive council, where you have an elected executive or council manager, and then a process for how you can go to one of those options. And then I did find that Summit was there's 2 counties that had the council manager form, Summit and Wasatch, and then a bunch of county commission ones, but then there's a number down here that are either have it on the ballot or about to work on it or something like that. So there's several more that are looking to switch in Utah. And then I think I'm a little familiar with Minnesota because I grew up there. Where's the guy from Waterville? That was just right next to where I grew up. Anyway, I'm going to say about 20 years ago, gave cities a whole bunch, or counties, I'm sorry, a whole bunch of options in terms of every single elected position, whether it could be elected or moved to a staff level position, and different counties have chosen different paths on that. But, North Carolina has a whole different situation. If you go to Virginia, counties, there's places where there's no cities, there's just counties, and they run the schools and everything, so they're way different. In Nevada, you had Carson County, which is a city and a county consolidated, and so there's all kinds of, every state has a different way or different options to do it. If you saw the big thing for California, they have various statutory forms of cities and statutory forms of counties as well, and that's true in every state. So, yeah, that whole research to see what every state did would take a lot, but it wouldn't change, for me, it wouldn't change what our state says we can do, because you guys are bound by,
Well, yeah,
what the
that's true,
statute is.
but one of the options for this commission is to also look at recommending no change. And no change would also include what's happening like in Ada County and how they've dealt with some of their issues. So that's just one of the options that this commission can look at. It doesn't have to be something other than what we have. It can also include recommending what we have.
Absolutely. And I think we've heard from all of our electeds so far because they're very comfortable with that. What I tried to do was show something else because no one else has brought that kind of alive. And I think some of these stories bring it alive. The other thing is that we all know too that if our county commissioners today wanted to set that up, they could do it. So that's not really, I may be misunderstanding the law. Maybe our lawyer in the room can help, but it seems to me that we don't have to make a decision on that. All we have to do is say that we have a recommendation. If our recommendation is no change, that doesn't mean the county commissioners can't say, okay, no change, but we kind of like what they're doing in Ada County. We want to implement that. The Ada County person, though, the Ada County positioner really isn't a county manager, though, because they don't have, you go back to the word authority, they don't have the departments reporting up to them. They basically are a very high, I guess it is a very high level, and I'm saying high level, important administrative support person for them. But that's different from a county manager that would bring in a different a level of expertise and advice for not only the Board of Commission, but for the other electeds too. Wouldn't control the operation, but would bring in that level of expertise.
Sherry, do you have a question? Sherry, are you there? Did we lose you?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
No, I've got noise in the background. Hang on. Okay. I just want to thank you two for all of this wonderful information because you haven't heard a lot of optional forms presented like this, and it was really great. Thank you so much. No questions.
Thank you. Kurt, did you have any questions?
Yes. First, also, thank you to the subcommittee for pulling all this information together. It was great. I appreciate all the hard work that went into that. For either Kristin or David, could you give us some sense of what the going rate for a well-qualified county manager might be, since cost is something that should factor into consideration?
I'll make a stab at that because I did not ask any individual what their salary was, but I did ask them to give me, would they be comfortable discussing the topic because it was of concern to our study commission. And I was basically told that, one, it depends very much on the size of the community. There are benchmarks out there. You might have remembered when Sylvia was talking last week, she and I kind of had this little discussion about benchmarks. That there are benchmarks out there that I can assure you that it's not going to be inexpensive. If you're going to be hiring this level of individual, then, but you get what you pay for. I've been told that it's probably about, you look at what the sheriff is making and what the county, the prosecuting attorney are making, it's about at that level. So it is not inexpensive, but you need to realize what you're buying. You're buying a lot of expertise. Just like when you
You're
hire,
saying that the county manager is compensated at a level commensurate with our elected officials?
yes, the highest level issues. It's my understanding our county commissioners are paid 90. I don't know what our sheriff is paid, but I'm assuming he's paid more than that.
90.
Well, then they probably need to redo a study here in terms of salaries too. Which, if you have a county manager, that's probably going to be one of the first things that they implement, because in a lot of these counties, it's done every couple of years.
And-
I did talk to, or in talking to some of the county managers, they basically told me that they did some studies pre-COVID, and they know that information is probably totally invalid now, and they're going to have to redo them. But it sounds like this county has an exceptional HR director, and this is something that she'd probably roll up her sleeves and have a lot of fun with.
And I would just add that a different benchmark might be what the administrators in the area make as well, because it's not just size, it's also regional. I mean,
Yes, thank you, it is.
If you go to Florida, there's a kind of a amount that they get paid there. They get paid way too much in California, I think. In fact, I didn't mention it, but I was the president of the International City Management Association in 2010, and one of the biggest claws on my chest was there were a couple of situations in California. The one guy was making, I don't know, $700,000 and he went to prison and all that. It just made all of us look bad. And I believe that this job is a calling, and if it's a calling, then you know, then pay isn't the first thing that you should be talking about. So when we look at what's going on in this area, that really, it should be commensurate with, it should be
Right.
more than the department heads usually.
Right.
But, you know, not so much more that, that you're, you know, that you're paying too much for the region and for the economy and for what folks in this area would find acceptable, you know. And so it really is regional. I was working with the mayor of Spokane recently when they went to recruit a new city manager. And so pay was one of those issues, and they have they had some constraints and those kinds of things, and so those constraints limited the hiring pool, because there's, if you think about it, somebody's not going to leave a job that they really like, and that's the one you want, the person that's doing really well and really likes their job, that's the one you want to bring over to come and do great things for you. They're not going to leave it usually for less money unless there's some family issue or something like that. So you have to be competitive, but I don't think, but I don't think you have to. But there's a market here in northern Idaho that's different than the Boise area or Seattle or you know, those other areas. It's going to be less here than it's going to be in some of those other areas. More like maybe Montana. There's, you know, if you look at the pay for county administrators in Montana, I think there's a really good one you probably didn't talk to in Helena, which wouldn't be way too different. Done some really great things there. That's you know, those are the kinds of folks who are probably going to come to Coeur d'Alene when the time comes, or Kootenai County.
Well, we know that was it the treasurer who just recently recruited someone he thinks is dynamite? She came to speak to us. Well, she came from somewhere in Washington, right? So, you know, fortunately we were able to recruit her. So I think I throw that term benchmark out there, and I'm assuming everybody knows what that means. But it's not just across the U.S. It's regional. Again, I'll go back to my my years in healthcare. When we were hiring technical people, we usually would know that if anybody applied from California, we wouldn't even bother to interview them or reach out because they were making about $40,000 more than ours were. You can't bring anybody like that in. And this was in Houston, Texas, you know, compared to California, talking 20-some years ago. So you've got to, sometimes you are limited to a particular region. But I think you'd also find that once someone came in and made everything more efficient, you would probably find cost savings because we have a lot of things that we do very manually that we wouldn't have to do.
Well, and I would say that in the places I worked, the things that I did in those organizations saved more than what I was paid. I'm proud of that, and I think there are others in our profession who would say the same thing. So I think the things that I was able to do in terms of efficiencies and those kinds of things paid for me.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Bryant, you don't appear on the Zoom. Are you here? Bryant Bushling? I will assume Bryant is not with us. Bob, did you have any questions? Do you want me to ask you, Kristin, if you have questions?
No.
Bob, do you have any questions?
I should have brought some, though.
Thank you both for what you're doing here tonight. During our public comments, we had several people that asked questions about if we had 5 or 7 commissioners, that their ability to work together and form committees together would subvert the open meeting rules. Would you comment on how that would be something of concern?
I think it would be similar to the fact that we had a subcommittee. The 3 of us met. We didn't have everybody listening to us, but it didn't matter. We didn't have a quorum, but we bounced ideas off each other. We encouraged each other. We talked about what we found and shared it. I think it's the same model. You've got people that get together and they bounce ideas off each other. And actually, I think it's probably healthier than what probably happens now, which is, I don't think any of us believe people are not talking to each other. They're just not talking to each other in front of the mic when you can't talk to each, when you might get in big trouble doing that. So I think it's what I've heard from the county managers that I talked to is there are, if you might recall, I used the term, the whole process is regulated. It's regulated in the sense that it's encouraged because people have areas of expertise. They get together, they talk, but nothing can happen until they take it to the board and as we have the way our agenda works, you can have a discussion and then you can put something on the board. You've got that separation, so nobody could come to the group and try to impose some idea and say, now let's vote on it. You got to put it on, you've got to discuss it, and then you come back. People have time to think about it. I've actually heard that even though almost all of the elections were partisan, so someone had an R or a D or whatever else but behind their name, it became less important when there were more of them because they could collaborate. Also, they were people from the community who still had jobs or were kind of invested in a different way. I think of some of us who are retired who volunteer for all sorts of things. We're out there kind of with the people. We're not isolated. We're not sitting in an office waiting for somebody to call and talk to us, right? So I actually think that what I heard is that they tend to get along better, and that sometimes when there are contentious issues, that's when they sometimes bounce ideas off the county manager, who cannot vote, but might bring a level of expertise in. Also, what I found interesting, is that a lot of the electeds, I'll give the example of Summit County, when they went to that new form, and if you recall that form, they went from 3 to 5 commissioners, but they had the county manager, county administrator, they left all the other electeds in place exactly as they were. At first, the electeds thought, I don't need this, I don't want this, I don't have to deal with that person. But slowly but surely, what I heard is that they actually realize there's some value, because I can talk to this person and it kind of takes some of the edge off what I might be saying, rather than having a clash with another row officer or a clash with the commissioners. We're trying to figure out a way to talk about it so we're all heard and we come up with a solution. So in a sense, that person can help tamp down some of the partisanship. Did that answer the question?
And then I would just add that I think I had about 120 elected official bosses over the years, and one of the most important conversations we had was about the law, which is, you can't have a serial meeting where you call Bob and Bob calls Sue,
Yeah.
and Sue calls Joe, and you kind of figure out what you're going to do tonight. And my job was to make sure they understood how much trouble they could be in, and how easy it is to discover emails if they're emailing each other and talking about the comments. So this whole code of ethics piece that a manager has, it's our job to call people on it, and one of my heroes is a manager in Mountain View, California, who the mayor was doing some things he shouldn't do, and the manager called him on it, and it could easily have cost him his job, but it didn't matter. He did the right thing, and as it turned out, the guy went to jail, and he didn't lose his job. But the point was, he had the guts to stand by his principles and the values of our profession. And so when you talk about 5 people talking to each other, or 7 people talking to each other, or 38 in Marathon County who break into little subcommittees all the time, the law is still there, and it's and we have a lot of people that watch what we do, and so my job is to make sure, or the manager's job is to make sure that we don't do that, because the consequences are too great.
Thank you.
I don't know if that helped, but that's.
Phil, questions?
It's been a long night. In the interest of time, I thank you.
Now I know how those
thank
other
you
people
both.
felt here.
And
It's like,
it
oh
was
my
very,
gosh.
very informed, Mr. Childs, and Kristin, you did great work. I really can't take any credit for it, but thank you both, and I'll pass at that.
Tamara?
I do. Mr. Childs, you mentioned about the 3 commissioners, and no one wants 3 bosses to have to work for. But if you have 5 commissioners, doesn't that mean you have 5 bosses you have to work for? I'm just wondering the dichotomy in the statement between the 3 and the 5.
Okay, so what I was trying to say, and I wasn't very clear about it, is 5 people or 3 people trying to run the day-to-day operations of an organization. And so you got, I don't know, was there 900 employees or something like that in the county? Something like that. There's a bunch of employees. So you got 3 people trying to, manage all of those departments. Or do you have a county administrator, county manager, who they all report to, or is the person who coordinates between the departments and builds the collaboration? And then you allow those 3 people, instead of them trying to run the day-to-day operations, sit at a board of directors situation. And so, a board of directors of a corporation doesn't run the departments. They give direction and authority to the CEO, and the CEO folks report to the CEO, and that's how the place gets run. That's really what you're talking about, being a little bit more like a business. Mm-hmm. The board should be about policy, and I think there's a saying that I've heard before when boards get trained, is nose in, fingers out. That's how you should function as a board member. You want your nose in to see what's going on, but your fingers are out because you've got an administrator that does that part. That's the authority. So I probably just didn't say it as clearly as I meant.
Ryan? Dave?
No, thank you also.
Bruce?
We're counting on you, Bruce. You always have questions.
I'll have another one for you. maybe.
Okay, I can't wait. I can't wait.
Mr. Childs, thanks for coming out and tonight. It's pretty clear to me that you're a pretty good person, and you seem to have a pretty strong moral compass, an ethical compass. You brought up the code of ethics and how you won't contribute campaign money to a particular candidate. But
can't.
in today's day and age, we live in what's becoming a very balkanized society, and politics is infected everywhere, whether it's schools, hospitals, BOCCs, Congress, I mean, every place. We see it everywhere. And, so when you talked a little bit about having 5 commissioners, and then keeping the sheriff and the DA as elected positions, but you thought the other ones could maybe change, maybe be appointed or hired positions. And I guess my question to you is because people, I think, are afraid, right now with what's going on in this country and what they've seen and how balkanized it's become, that in essence, by giving up elected positions, you're yielding power by the people in some way, shape, or form. Mm-hmm. So how much of a savings should there be? How much economic savings do you think there should be in a county government to take some of these elected positions and make them appointed so that it makes sense for the citizens to yield that power?
Bruce, I think we're starting to step into deliberations.
I
understand you're asking for his.
Well, why don't you let him answer the question?
I understand you're asking for his opinion, but be careful, we're stepping into deliberations, which we can't start tonight.
He made the suggestion tonight, I'm using his words, that we keep the sheriff and the DA as elected positions, but the other ones we look at should be considered to be maybe appointed because we get efficiencies with government. Now, this gentleman has worked his entire career in government in city manager and county manager positions. So maybe he could tell us what kind of efficiencies could be gained by getting rid of these elected positions. Now, that has nothing to do with deliberations. But, I think it would be...
I agree.
It'd be nice if Mr. Childs could answer that question and not have you steer this committee the way that you are. Thank you.
I'm okay answering that. What I was suggesting in terms of the other elected officials, and like the coroner, for example, from what I understand, brilliant person, retired from his previous career.
As a physician.
Yeah, as a physician. So, he's the man when it comes to being a coroner. Could also happen that somebody comes in, runs for coroner because they want the insurance or whatever, and their chief deputy then does that work, and that could happen. My point was saying that right now you have a number of what appear to be very qualified elected officials, other than the sheriff and the prosecutor or the attorney, who could very well become county employees. So I wasn't really implying that there's a dollar savings in terms of cash for their salaries, as much as I was saying to the extent that you could create efficiencies between departments. Some of those you saw where they brought the treasurer and the clerk and the assessor together in a single department, and were able to create some efficiencies because of the similarities in some of the things that they do, along with finance and the budget. There could be some savings there, but there might just be the opportunity to be more efficient, and maybe you can't pin a hard dollar number on that. But I understand the question behind that, which is people want to elect their government. I get that, and my response would be, and in a right next door in Hayden, for example, there's 5 elected officials, and folks get a choice for 5 elected officials for that area. here you've got, if you went to 5, you'd have 5 plus 2. That's still a lot of choices for elected officials. But you're right about the question about trust. I mean,
Well, that is a problem, because people are saying, trust us, trust us, trust us, and we end up getting disappointed. So that's part of the concern, and when I hear these words efficiency, and you're not the only person who's come before the commission to use terms like efficiency and things like that, but it's usually at the expense of something. And we had public comment here. Virtually every person didn't want to see change, except for one person. And, so I think it's important, that has to be taken into account.
And I get that, and that's why I use the ABS on my car example. It's like, well, I didn't want to change, but it saved my life a couple of times. And if we do some incremental changes, that, to me, that makes sense. And I'm not saying don't elect those folks. I'm saying give it some thought. Maybe there's a way that you can bring those folks in as employees, like some of these other counties did, in a way that that folks know that there's a competent person. It's somebody they voted for before, and you've preserved their job, which is kind of where it is now, and you get what you're going to get. You're going to get this assessor, and they're going to be with the organization, and it's going to create some efficiencies. That's kind of what I was saying. But I wasn't saying you should not do that. I'm saying that piece is worth some additional conversation and discussion about how you might do that. And then my other recommendations were, 5 members, part-time. My recommendation, no insurance, county manager, and then give some thought to this other piece. That's where I was coming from.
Well, I would like to have a follow-up question, if that's okay, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
You mentioned Mr. Childs having 5 part-time commissioners. And it's kind of funny that you mentioned about not having health insurance, because one of our commissioners, I think, has publicly stated that that's part of the reason they have their job. But with that said, one of the problems with part-time commissioners is that, we're part-time commissioners here for this study commission, so we don't have the time to do all the research. So you become beholden to what a manager gives you information-wise. And it's not uncommon, especially when you use corporations as an example, for the CEO to actually manipulate the board. Those things do happen. And so I'm just curious, again, in this era where ethics and trust us aren't really the same as they used to be during your career, how do you prevent that from happening? Because board members are not going to know these issues well. They're going to make decisions based upon what a manager tells them.
Well,
I wanted to answer.
again, as I mentioned at the beginning, my job, and I think my colleagues' jobs, and I'm still what's called a senior advisor. I work with younger managers all over the place, and so I know what the issues are that they're dealing with. It's not like I've been gone so long that I'm not current with that. No, I just forgot, but I am old, so I just forgot the question. I did forget the question. Help me here.
Well, how do those part-time managers, how do they get the information? How can they be assured of that?
Part-time board and the manager. So the one thing I mentioned at the beginning is our job is not to tell the board what to do. Our job is to provide options. And that means you do the research, you provide the background, kind of like the research she did, and then you provide options for them to look at, think about, and move forward. But if you've got there are 14,000 fire departments in cities across the country, and the vast majority of them have either 5 or 7 member city councils. I'm talking cities now, but the vast majority of them are part-time. The vast majority of them make $1,000 a month or less. The vast majority of them have a manager or administrator that provides that information. So it's not like it doesn't exist. And the reason that we went to a 5 or 7 member council and a professional manager is because of the corruption in the 1900s, 1910, 1920. You've heard of, what's that guy, Boss Tweed and all that kind of thing. So there was this reform movement. So you saw in North Carolina, a couple of counties started to go with the council manager plan. That all came out of the reform movement that said, well, look at all this corruption. Look at all the backroom deals. Look at all that stuff. We got to get rid of that. So it's not like mistrust is new. You know, that's the other thing. It's not like mistrust is new, but there is a model that seems to work. The cities in the United States and counties that have a AAA bond rating, which is a rating based on having a good strategic plan, having a good financial position, having a good operations that make sense, and because they come in and they look at everything. A AAA bond rating, those are the 2/3 of them have a city manager or county manager, and I think there's a study that was done a few years ago by IBM that looked at communities across the country and their level of efficiency, and they were trying to figure out what was it that made the difference. What was the one lever that you could pull? Was it performance measurement? Was it a whole bunch of things? Well, it turns out it was having a professional manager, and they measured it at like 10 or 15% more efficient for those organizations. So yes, you've got people in this community, and I understand in every community that's like, well, why would we want this change? And my point at the beginning and all the way through is, it's not, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's how do we make incremental change and make things better every single day when we come to work. That's my job, and I think that should be the county board's job too, is just how do we make it better? And so I only answered part of your question, but that's the best I've got.
Well, if I could just chime in here. The word efficiency, that does not necessarily mean dollars. I know that your background, you've always worked in like for-profit sorts of things, I think. When you work in not-for-profit environments, efficiency means doing better with the same amount. It can mean doing better with less, but it can mean doing better with the same amount. When I would go into a new department and want to affect change in terms of improvements, I certainly wouldn't fire people. Well, you stay with, you look at what you've got and you figure out how can you do it better. Okay, we don't need 3 of those, but can one of those be trained to do this? Because we don't have that. And we have systems in place that allow this to happen, and now we can do more for our patients. So efficiency, I just wanted to correct that, because I don't mean correct you, but just make sure people understand that efficiency doesn't necessarily mean saving dollars. It means doing things better for whoever the people are that you're serving. And the other comment I want to make is this part-time, full-time. Nowhere does it say that our current commissioners are full-time, and nowhere does it say that if you have 5 or 7 or 9 or however many, that's part-time. Basically, people are smart. If you're going to pay them $1,000 a month and they have a full-time job, then they're not going to work probably full-time. Let me use me as an example. We're all members of this commission. I bet you I've put thousands of hours into this work because I wanted to. Nobody's paying me. Wouldn't matter if it had been part-time or full-time. I did it. Did I not answer every question that all of you might have? No, I couldn't. I didn't even think of the questions. That's the beauty of having a team. That's the beauty of bouncing it off people. I could have maybe gone in another direction or pulled in more data. But people, if people take on a task and they know they're getting paid $1,000 a month, and they know that the work ebbs and flows, and then they know that they can come up with an idea, a policy change, a new ordinance or whatever, and they can hand it off to somebody and say, go make it happen, then you can do that and still have another life. I don't want to try to call it full-time, part-time. I think I've heard criticisms from some of the members, maybe on this Citizens Commission, and from other elected leaders. They're always pointing the finger at, well, this person doesn't really work that, well, that person doesn't work that. They're easy to talk about, but they're all getting paid a full-time job. I don't think they have a job description that tells them they have to work a minimum of 40 hours. And so I think we need to be careful with full-time, part-time when we're talking about the commissioners, whether they be 3 of them, 5 of them, or like in Marathon County, 38 of them.
Well, I think the difference is their pay, Kristin, not the amount of hours they put in. I think that's really what you're getting at. And I do look forward to hearing how you will articulate efficiency into the exchange of the citizenry having less voting power. So that's it for me. Thank you.
I don't know.
I'd like to
Wait.
make one comment here, and that is, we do not have the authority to recommend full-time, part-time, nor do we have the authority to recommend pay levels. Those are the decisions made by the county commission.
That's not what I was saying. What I was saying is that the differentiating factor is that Mr. Childs is talking about part-time, where you get a very small base pay with no benefits, the way I understood it correctly, versus what we have now, which is a $90,000 a year commissioner with full benefits.
Which is the decision the commissioners themselves must make after, after our recommendation, after an election, if a change is made.
I think we all understand that.
We don't have anything in our recommendation to say it's full-time, part-time.
It was a term.
Or how much they're going to.
It was a term to describe whether it's a
respect,
full-time pay or a part-time.
Can I say this, though? My intention was that we hear over and over that we don't want career politicians. That's kind of an evil word. How do you get to not having a career politician? You don't give them, full-time pay, or, yeah, and so.
That's what I'm referring to.
That's the basis for my recommendation. It's not other than, hey, everybody says we don't like full-time, career politicians, it's an evil word, blah, blah, blah. Well, there's a way to get to that. And the extra benefit of that, which we've heard people have concerns about, well, we don't have enough quality people out there. Well, if I don't have to give up my career to be part of making the county a better place, now I've expanded the pool of people who might be interested in doing this work. That's where I was coming from in that conversation about pay. It's it's not to save money. It's to increase the quality.
And my reference to full-time and part-time was based upon what you were saying. Had nothing
And no
to do
offense
with
to any current elected when I say that. I'm not. I'm making general terms, not criticizing somebody.
Go ahead, you skipped yours.
Kristin, did you, in any of the examples you provided, did any of those involve the type of a county where the board could appoint any county elected official to serve as the manager?
No, because of the, I showed you in the beginning how I drilled down. No, none of the people I talked to, but in the research that I have done, yes, there are counties that can do that, but that is not what I looked at.
There are other counties that can do that. Did you find out anything in regard to whether they have and whether that's how that has gone?
No, wait, okay, make sure I'm clearly answering what you're asking. What is the model that you're asking me to respond to?
So, under the commission manager form of government in Idaho, it's one of the options. The board can appoint any county elected official to serve as the manager, which I think they may have used this previously with the clerk, possibly.
Right.
I think there was an example of this. So I was just wondering if you had seen any other counties where they had tried that, where they had authority to do that, they tried that, and what their experience with that had been.
The example here, I think it was Tom Taggart.
Tom Taggart.
That was kind of like what they did in Ada County. They picked a former county official. I think he was I think he was no longer the clerk, and asked him to be in that role, and it was kind of interim because when the next group came in. When you're talking about a county,
But this is actually, this form involves, it's an elected official, and the Board of Commissioners says, we're gonna make you the manager. So it'd be like-
I see. No, you're, no. That actually is, there, I don't even know if that's one of our options. Now,
It
now
is under the optional form under commission
But
manager.
you can say, you can make it an elected position. There is a model in which you can have an elected official who is the executive. Usually that's called the executive. That's what I was referring to earlier. You look at that group of counties that have county managers, and then you have the elected executive, and then you have the elected executive and the county manager. That's what I was referring to. No, I strictly looked at county managers and did not look at that model.
Yeah, okay. Mr. Childs, have you ever seen that where the commissioners can pick from among the other elected officials
Well,
and appoint one of them as the manager, should they be so willing?
well, I'm gonna
just wondered if that
I'm gonna
had
take
ever-
it up a level and just say that when it comes, if there's a position that's called county manager, and the county board gets to pick that person, they have the power to pick anybody. And so if they wanna, hire the sheriff to be the county manager, they could do that.
Yeah,
Theoretically, and you would hope that they would, go through a process and find the most qualified person to do the duties that they think need to be done. But if it happens to be, the dog catcher, picking, or no, the weed killer.
Yeah.
The weed killer guy, they pretty much and that's an elected official, they could do that. That person would have to leave their elected
No, they
position
wouldn't. Not under
to
this
take that,
form.
but that's, yeah.
So I'm just bringing it up because there is contention about people want to retain electing the officials that are in the existing elected officials, and one of the ways that the board could, maintain that, but also have a manager. One possibility is just that idea was saying, which is authorized. They just pick from
Does
the
the
elected
statute allow them to make them the manager and
302.
retain their elected position, or just?
Yeah, they do both.
Okay, that I haven't heard of.
315302.
No.
Anyway, question about ICMA and its ethics. That's well and fine. I get it. Who enforces that?
Oh, sure. Well, good question. So, ICMA, International City County Management Association, has a code of ethics. They've had it since 1912. And they have a committee on professional conduct. The process for ethics enforcement is that anybody can submit a complaint about ethics to the headquarters of ICMA. ICMA then will review that. And there's a certain confidentiality at the beginning of the process, of course. They'll review it, they'll discuss it with whatever the member is. If there's something that has legs, it goes to the Committee on Professional Conduct, and they have several sanctions that they can do. They can do what's called a private censure. That private censure is a letter that goes to the member that says, you participated in the local elective process, and that's not one of our, it's not permitted, so we're going to private censure you. If something rises to a higher level, let's say somebody embezzled some money or something like that, that could be, or used their city credit card for personal use. That happens once in a while, and these idiots do that stuff, or they date a department head, or do, just something dumb. That's actually, there's 12 tenets. Number 13 in my mind is don't be stupid. That's number 13. But anyway, so they can issue what's called a public censure. That public censure means the letter goes to the member, it also goes to the governing board, and it goes to the local media. So when someone is publicly censured, it's a big deal. The whole town knows about it. The details of the situation are laid out, and often the manager is terminated either before the public censure comes out or as a result of it. Then there's two more levels. There's a expulsion. We can expel them from the organization, and then there's expulsion with membership bar, which means they're expelled and they can never come back. And all of those are used. I think the CPC, the Committee on Professional Conduct, meets 4 times a year, and there's always a few cases because we have 12,000 members, and out of 12,000, there's always 1 or 2 knuckleheads that does something wrong. So they use that process every quarter, and there are a few. There are private censures. There are a few public censures, and membership expulsions and bars and all those kinds of things. And we're very serious about it. And I've got a copy of the Code of Ethics if you'd like to see it. I'm happy to provide that to you. And that's what we live by, and that's why I would recommend that when you, if there's a county manager hired, and you hire, authorized, and you hire one, the county hires one, that they be required to abide by the Code of Ethics, ICMA Code of Ethics, even if they're not an ICMA member. We can't enforce it, but at least you've got some standards by which they live. I'd like to say that you should ask them to belong and abide by it. But a lot of contracts or employment agreements now have a chapter in them or a section in them that deals with the Code of Ethics, and that the manager abide by that, and that violating it becomes cause for dismissal, so that you actually can. You have some teeth in there, so you can actually dismiss a manager if they're violating the Code of Ethics.
So any person who's essentially a constituent within that manager's county could raise it? It doesn't have to be another ICMA member?
No, anyone. And of course, they're going to take a look at it, make sure it's valid, and that there's actually something that's happened that is that's valid. But yeah, that happens all the time too, where somebody will just say, "Hey, here's a newspaper article about, Steve Jones, and here's what he did. He arrested for drunk driving and lied, and then used a city credit card, and that goes off to ICMA, and they look at it and say, what say you? And if they say, oh, I didn't do it, then we have a process for where the state association actually does a investigation process, goes and talks to people and gets the data and information, and then sends it back to ICMA, and then that goes to the Committee on Professional Conduct. So there's a process there, and it's been rigorously used over the years.
Okay, thanks.
Sherry, do you have any questions?
No, I do not. Thank you.
Okay. Kurt, any more questions?
No questions, thank you.
Phil? Tamara?
This is for Mr. Childs. I appreciated your honesty in your job description of that you kept moving to maybe bigger cities to further your career. One of the issues that keeps coming before us is the issue of consistency, and that a county manager would be great to have that consistency. In your experience, how many of them stay? Because according to here, you had between a 3-year, maybe a 6-year stint in between in your specific positions. So
yes, and there's a couple ways to answer that. Number one, I think Minnehaha was 7 or 8 years, and Blue Earth, St. Anthony was 8 years, and some of them were shorter. The average is about 7. That's sort of the national average. It used to be, when I got into the profession in the 70s, it used to be more like 2. And a couple of so it's a good question. A couple of the factors are there are state pensions, and if somebody's in the state pension program, they're not likely to move across the country if they're, and leave that pension behind. My situation was that in 1978, the state of Minnesota allowed, because it was like 10 or 12 years to vest in the pension plan, and the average was 2 years that folks stayed. So most of these city and county managers never got a pension. So they said the city could opt to contribute the equivalent of the pension to a 401k kind of a plan. So I actually did that back then. So then I stayed in Minnesota 20 more years. I should have got in the pension plan, but I didn't. But so it went into the 401k. So I had more mobility than some of the other administrators do. I have colleagues that have been in the same community or county for 20 years. That's possible. At early career, folks move a little bit more often. Once you get a little more established in your career, your kids are in school, you've got a house, folks kind of like to stay around. This is a destination here, so I think if someone was to come to Coeur d'Alene, Kootenai County from somewhere else, this could be a destination, and it'd be and the person you might hire would be experienced enough that this might be a place that they wanted to stay for a period of time, because that continuity is important. And I even over 8 years, I think I had in Minnetonka, I had a dozen different city council members, because they would end their term and another person would come on, and so that continuity of the manager was important, especially now with term limits. A lot of places have term limits, so the days of having a city or county commissioner that's been on the board for 30 years are a little more rare, but that was common back when I got into the profession. That was very common, and so continuity is important, and I think you'll find again, if it happens and you make the right hire, you're going to get somebody that's going to stay a while.
Actually, I've got a comment on that too. I was looking through my notes here in terms of the people. So in Cass County, that's the county where I said that they changed their form. He was hired in 2017, so obviously he's not gone yet, and it's only been 4 years, but it was a new position. And Hughes County, the form of government changed in 2006. He's been the manager ever since that time. In Sioux Falls, she was there. Where did I see that? I'm sorry, I'm not seeing that quickly. In Pitt County, he was there for 20 years. So again, it goes back to what Dave said. Depends on the community itself, and a lot of people come. I think some people will come to a community and want to stay there and raise their family there and have that consistency. The other thing I want to point out in terms of consistency, if you have a county manager and part of the process is you have a robust strategic plan and you're getting input from the citizens and you've got a plan that's going 5 years in the future, and when a new manager comes in, I can't speak to county government. You can tell me if this is the way it works. Yeah, but in healthcare, when I would go to a new department, there was a structure there in place already, and I wouldn't make any serious changes at all for a year, because I would want to make sure that I knew how it was running, why it was running that way, who the people were. What my obligations were under the strategic plan. I mean, I stayed in my places a long time, 14 years, 13 years, and two in one case, but the case that was two, I basically was working at Baylor College of Medicine, but in the neurology department at Methodist, and my boss said, there's an opening for a hospital department, and I just want you to know you'd be good for it. So sometimes, if you mentor your people, or if you're mentored, you'll be encouraged to move because it's a good career change. But the people that I interviewed, most of them were in the community and in the community for a long time, and they didn't want to leave. They didn't plan to leave. Doesn't mean
And then
that they wouldn't.
I would add that, again, if this happens, the first hire is the most important in terms of continuity and everything. They're gonna set a tone. They're gonna get folks all on the same page. They're gonna come in and build a robust organization where the organizational culture and the employees are pulling together, and there's just a great culture in this organization. That's what they're gonna do. And so if you make that first hire right, the person that comes in after it is gonna build on that, not change it. And that's super important. And I've had personal experience with that, where I followed a manager with 20 years and Minnetonka, it's probably, if you check, it's probably one of the finest managed organizations in the country, in my mind. And it's not just because of me, but I have some credit there. I mean, the manager that just retired, I hired, 1993. How long ago was that? Anyway, she's been the manager for a number of years. So there's just been this continuity of building the culture, AAA bond rating, low taxes, 99% satisfaction level from the citizens. I mean, employees think it's the best place they've ever worked. It's just all the pieces have come together. And so that first hire, if you do this, is the most important, because they can set a really great tone and pull the pieces together. And the bottom line of all of that, in terms of efficiency, is the best service to the people. That's who our customer is at the bottom. At the end of the day, it's how do you provide the best service to all of you and all the folks who live in the county. And that's the goal. It's not a profit motive, but it's the best service for the lowest cost. That's what you want to do.
Brian?
Earlier, you referred to a period in American history, the Tammany Hall era, the Big Boss era, where parties were strong and there was true tension between the parties and how people got into office. And in some of the cities, notable cities, there was rampant corruption. And that gave rise to, forgive the word, a more progressive era, the Wilson presidency, the Roosevelt presidency.
I like the reform movement as opposed to progressive.
And they were more of a mind that
It's sinister.
a professional class should evolve into government and have a role, that they can run government better if we have a professional class of executives in the government. And that evolved, and organizations such as perhaps roughly yours evolved out of that concept of a professional class of stewards in the government. And we've gotten further away from the notion of these directly elected and accountable officials, and in many places in the country more comfortable with that notion of a county executive and a more CEO type of a commissioner arrangement. But I think we've seen some of the results of that in the past year, in fact, of strong people within the government, not necessarily elected, making decisions, steering decisions that are very unpopular. And I guess at this time, I think it's very unpopular for people to contemplate the notion of an executive or a manager within a county government, because there's this fear in the air. Everyone can feel it. It's in this room. You could cut it with a knife. We have rural people here living on farms, and land is getting gobbled up and being developed. Nobody really trusts anybody else. That notion of neighbor really is dissolving. We're at each other. And that plays out in politics. And one of the things in North Carolina that I observed in some of the public literature was that the commissioner or manager type form of government arrangement there really ran into trouble because people are more factionalized, and it's very hard for a manager to deal with that, to have elected officials who are really vying and sometimes running on a particular line item that is their issue, and then the manager has to grapple with that contention. And so it was a common complaint among people who held those positions to the National County Association, what have you, that this was making it harder that these positions were intended to make things more efficient, deliver better services to the people, but because of the factionalism in government, it was making it actually much harder to do, and they had to kind of rethink in these organizations, like how is the manager going to deal with these kinds of things? And so, I've laid a lot out there. I think my personal observation is that we've kind of seen that rise of this professional class within our government, that we're all too busy working, trying to make a living and pay taxes, right? And we trust in those that are in these positions, and I think there's a feeling of that trust is not warranted, specifically in the last year to 2 years. People are very concerned about it. This commission is grappling with that, and I guess my question would be, given those premises, and perhaps you could take contention with some of them, but you get the gist of where I'm coming from. How would you make what recommendation would you make about how to grapple with all these things that really are causing people in their gut to say, having a manager is giving up too much control, consolidating elected positions under them is just, a harebrained scheme because it gives up our right to directly elect people. Who cares if we throw them out every 2 years, right? We're all at each other. But let's get rid of the last group, see if the next group does. Instead, you're going to put in a professional manager and consolidate all these positions under him. How do you unwind all that into something that's logical, that a county that's grown is rural, but also, urban, even more growing and growing? How do you reconcile all these things to make people comfortable with the position of a manager?
Yeah, and you've asked a really good question. The reform movement in fact, it started with engineers. The first city administrators, county managers were engineers because communities were growing. They didn't have somebody competent to do the work that needed to be done, which was water and sewers and streets and infrastructure and all that stuff. So the first ones were engineers, and then they figured out, engineers are pretty good at engineering, but they're not as good at running organizations, and that's not their interest. And so, again, that professionalism continued. But you talked about our organization, but we still believe at the foundation of what we do that in cities and counties across the country, and I'm not talking the New Yorks and Chicagos and et cetera, I'm talking about those towns of 500 to 30,000 or whatever, that citizen leadership is what needs to be the elected bodies. I'm not advocating that you need the bank CEO and et cetera, to be the elected officials. I've had folks from all walks of life be the elected officials, and every one of them, I believe, almost every one of them has done a really great job. And I think it's our ethic that's the important piece. But if they come in and they're running a complex organization, and that's what it is. Some of you remember Ross Perot. Remember Ross Perot? And he had a chart. And he said, it's really easy to fix this. All you got to do is this, okay? Well, at the same time that he was doing that, I was reading this report by a guy named Forrester, and it was called the counterintuitive behavior of social systems. And basically the idea was if you pull the string over here in a social system, something happens over there that you can't anticipate. And that the work we do is way more complicated than building streets and sewers than it was, which is exactly what you're saying. It's more complicated, so it's confusing, it's hard to have trust. And so to me, the balance is you need some folks inside the organization who have the, you know, the legal, technical, HR, personal, human relations, communications, strategic skills, who can provide help to those elected officials who are coming in and they're your neighbors and they want to make things better, and it's a complicated system, and so somebody's got to help them. And I don't know if that completely answers your question, but I think there's a reason why things have gotten more professional, because they've had to be, because things have gotten more complicated, just like your car. You know, it used to be just turn the knob and change the carburetor, and when's the last time you pulled a set of spark plugs out? You know, things have gotten more complicated, so you don't fix the computer in your car. You take it to get fixed. You might change your own oil or something, but that's about it nowadays. So my point is, it's gotten more complicated, but the ethic of at least my profession is, and it's in the code of ethics, there is a value in the election of folks from all walks of life in our community or county or whatever to serve in those elected roles, and our job is to help them succeed. And yes, that might be a hard sell for some folks who don't have trust, but if you take out angst at the federal level and a little less angst at the state levels, and take out the angst at the large city level, you're going to find that small and medium-sized cities and counties are running pretty darn well, and that you know, you're not. That's not where the corruption is. That's not where the you know, where all the news media comes in, and you know, every so often there might be, you know, somebody that does something dumb, but you know, the model works, and you know, that's structure's important, and people are important. Those are the two pieces that make for a good organization. You've got to have a good structure that folks can work in and they can understand what the constraints that they work under, and then you have to hire the right people to fill the positions to do the work. And that, for me, is what speaks to some professional management and a larger number of on the elected board, you know. And if I was going to prioritize, I'd say, you know, we have a chance for 3, 5, or 7, I think is what the statute says. Well, I'd go 5, 7, and 3 in that order. So if 5's not enough, I'd go 7 before I'd go to 3. Does that make sense? 7's not a bad number. It's just more cats to herd, but it's fine. You know, I've had 7. I can work with 7. When I was the president of ICMA, I had 21 board members. And they were all Type A city managers. You think it's hard to manage a group of 5 or 7 electeds? Try 21 city or county managers. That's a trick for you. Anyway, I digress. Sorry.
Dave? Bruce?
One very quick one for Kristin.
Okay, good, because otherwise I'm gonna have to ask for a break. It's been
Very
too
quick.
long. Okay.
Did you put together a report, or could we have your presentation for the
You
commission
absolutely
members?
can have the presentation. I'm sending it to Dave, and he's going to attach it to the minutes. So.
Great, thank you.
And I've got tons of other stuff, you know, so any of you who want more information about any particular county, I'll give you what I have.
And then I have still have connections back to ICMA, and to the extent that any of you have questions or want any information, you can get a hold of me through the chair or whatever, and I'm happy to help in any way I can.
Well, thank you.
Sherry, any more questions?
We done yet?
I guess that's a valid question, but not necessarily for our guest. Kurt, any questions?
No, thank you.
Sherry? No.
No, I know, shocking.
Bruce? No. Anybody else? I didn't mean to skip over anybody, but
Yeah, you skipped over me.
questions?
No.
You just want to be asked, right? Just want to be asked.
Items for next meeting agendas. We start deliberations next week. Tamara?
I have a request. Is it possible to move that to the 27th? We have received 4.5 months worth of testimony information plus tonight's. That's a lot to sift through. Having a little
I can't hear you.
Sorry. Bumping that to the 27th so we can actually take the time. There's videos, I think, that need to be rewatched. Nancy had an hour-long presentation last week. We've had hours tonight. Having a week off to be able to go through all this, I think would be beneficial and allow us time to really kind of dig through all the pearls and the information that we've received.
Seems reasonable. Anybody have a motion?
I would make the motion to not meet next week and start deliberations on the 27th, as well as the consideration of your bylaws, right, on that.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I second.
A second.
Sorry, Kurt, you're too late.
No
Vote.
problem.
It's carried. We will go dark on the 20th. We will begin deliberations on the 27th. Beyond that, November 3rd, 10th, 17th, 24th, we'll have to flow with whatever's happening.
I thought we said the 24th, we are off.
You are correct. The 24th was dark.
Dave,
That shouldn't have been here that way.
Can you possibly send a short recap of what you're expecting us to do? I think you indicated that when we start deliberations after we consider the bylaw change, that we'd all go around the table and give an observation or something, but I'm not clear about what you're actually looking for and to protect us from getting into things. Is there a way that you can give us a vision of what you're asking us to?
Structure.
Structure, thank you.
Actually, I was
brain
hoping
dead.
it would be less structured when we get into deliberations,
Right.
except for the fact we don't walk all over one another speaking.
But
When
I-
somebody has the floor, then they shouldn't be interrupted by others. But I don't have in my mind a particular structure. What I was suggesting was we could start out deliberations by each coming out and saying what we think we've heard, what we believe, what we've come to a decision here. Lay out the possibilities, and then open discussion behind that. But I don't have a particular structure. For example, the structure of trying to circle
Yeah.
here in questions was simply to keep people from walking over one another.
So I just want to,
And it's the same thing. I don't know exactly how we're going to make that work yet.
it's what we heard, not necessarily what we recommend or what we want to, like we want additional information. So
Deliberation starts to get into what are our opinions, what do we think
Okay.
is happening. Right now, we've been taking testimony, and this was what I was trying to avoid with Bruce. I was hearing him start to move into our opinions as opposed to Dave's opinion. And if I was wrong there, I apologize, but that was the way I heard the question being phrased.
Okay.
But as we go into deliberations, that's where all of this comes up. What are our opinions? What do we
Okay.
think we've heard? What do we think would be a good idea?
Got it.
How we structure that, I'm open to suggestions on structure.
So basically, however we personally feel comfortable to present our recommendation. Is that what you're saying?
I would say that reasonable, yes.
Okay.
as long as you're not doing so with a handgun or. Is that agreeable to everyone?
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have anything more before we adjourn? Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Vote? We are adjourned.
And it is about 9:05, 9:06.
Yeah. 9:06.